down at the head of the table, calm and relaxed, almost suspiciously relaxed, his posture loose in a way that suggested he was carrying good news rather than bad. He looked around the room, meeting each executive's eyes in turn, letting the silence stretch just long enough to build anticipation. Then simply said, his voice carrying the weight of announcement, "I'm bringing Luna out of retirement." Silence. Absolute silence. For 3 seconds nobody moved, nobody blinked, nobody breathed, the words hanging in the air like smoke that refused to dissipate. Then, what? Wayne nearly fell out of his chair, his body jerking forward with such force that coffee sloshed over the rim of his cup, staining his sleeve. He didn't notice. "What did you just say? Can you repeat yourself?" Dayo repeated it, slower this time, giving each word space to land. "Luna is returning to music. I am bringing her to JD Records. Properly. Professionally. As an artist." Alice's eyes widened, her professional composure cracking to reveal genuine shock beneath, her tablet slipping in her grip. "Luna? Your Luna?" "My Luna." Dayo smiled, the expression warm and unapologetic. The same Luna who sang before she could walk. The same Luna who wrote her first album in her teens. The same Luna who stepped away because she chose motherhood, not because she lost her gift, the queen of pop and unarguably the best female vocalist. That Luna. Valerie dropped her pen, the sound of plastic hitting wood. Loud in the stunned quiet. She didn't bend to retrieve it. "Dayo, are you serious? This isn't a joke? Because if this is a joke, it's cruel, and I will personally." "It's not a joke." His voice was firm, certain, carrying none of the teasing that sometimes accompanied his announcements. "She came to me last night. She told me she wants to return. She told me she misses it, that the fire is still there, that she's ready. And I told her yes. I told her JD Records would sign her, build her team, plan her rollout, do this properly. I told her I would write for her, produce for her, stand beside her through all of it. And now I'm telling you." One executive, a man named Frank who handled international distribution, actually stood up, as if the physical act of rising could help process information that seemed impossible. "What do you mean you're bringing Luna back? As in officially? A full contract? A full campaign? Likened to JD Records? As in everything?" Dayo leaned forward, his elbows on the table, his eyes serious. "As in we treat her like the artist she is. Not my wife. Not a favor. Not a side project. Luna. Artist. JD Records. Full stop." The room exploded, the silence shattering into 1,000 pieces of excited disbelief, voices overlapping and climbing over each other. "What? Are you serious? When? Why didn't you start with that?" The executives were shocked beyond measured reason that Luna has left the industry twice, and each time she came back she came stronger than the last. First it was because of she lost her touch, and she came back with a new style that swept the audience of their feet, and now she went back inside again. Does this not mean she would be stronger, counting the fact she had Dayo by her side? The meaning was clear, she was coming back hot, and their label would have her in roster. Another reason they were happy was in the roster of JD, they didn't have any legendary figure apart from Dayo. Most of the artists were breaded by Dayo, which was good, but the label. Alice was already reaching for her laptop, her fingers moving across the keyboard before her mind had fully processed the announcement, her professional instincts kicking in before her emotions could catch up. "When did this happen?" "Last night." "Have you discussed terms? Does she have material ready? What's the timeline?" "Wayne, stop shouting, I can't think." Wayne looked like Christmas had arrived early, his expression transforming from concern to pure delight in seconds, his earlier panic forgotten. "Luna is coming back." "Luna, do you know what this means? Do you know what our audience is going to do?" They never stopped asking Dayo. Never. Every interview, every appearance, every time your name came up, someone asked about her. "Where's Luna? Is she okay? Will she sing again?" And now we get to answer them. Valerie was smiling so hard she couldn't hide it, the expression of someone who had been waiting for news she hadn't known she was waiting for. This is brilliant. Strategically, artistically, emotionally, this is brilliant. The narrative alone, Dayo. The love story, the return, the partnership. But more than that, her voice. Her writing. We all know what she's capable of. The entire room transformed instantly, the energy shifting from worried confusion to electric excitement. voices rising and falling as ideas began to form. Wayne pointed dramatically at Dayo, his finger accusatory, but his expression delighted. You cannot casually announce something like that. You can't just walk in here, looking like it's any other Tuesday, and drop, "I'm bringing Luna back," like you're commenting on the weather. There are protocols, Dayo. There are ways to prepare people for earth-shattering news. I just did. No. Yes. No. Yes. Dayo leaned back, his smile widening. And I would do it again. Because watching your faces was worth every protocol I broke. Alice ignored them completely, her mind already working at full speed, campaigns and strategies, and branding and rollouts and possibilities spinning through her consciousness like a slot machine hitting jackpot. She was muttering to herself, numbers and dates and concepts tumbling out. We need to assess her catalog, see what she has ready. We need to think about announcement strategy. Do we tease it or drop it fully formed? We need to consider timing relative to beautiful things. We don't want to cannibalize our own momentum. We need Alice. Dayo's voice cut through her stream of consciousness, gentle but firm. She looked up, her eyes slightly unfocused, already deep in planning mode. What? Breathe. She blinked, then laughed, the sound surprised and self-aware. Right? Breathing. Then she looked up from her laptop, her eyes sharp and focused, the professional taking over from the surprised colleague. When? When do we start? When does she come in? When can we hear what she's been working on? Dayo smiled, the expression knowing and pleased, the man who had been planning this moment longer than anyone realized. That's what we're here to discuss. And judging by the excitement already spreading across the room, the buzz of conversation and the rapid exchange of ideas, and the energy that had transformed the conference room from quiet concern to electric anticipation, chairs scraping closer together, voices rising with plans and possibilities. The next chapter of Luna's career was about to begin. Chapter 559, What Am I Forgetting? Felix stood outside Dayo's office for a few seconds, one hand resting against the door while he gathered his thoughts. The hallway around him was quiet, save for the occasional employee moving between departments with the focused energy of people who had no idea what kind of conversations happened behind closed doors on this floor. Through the frosted glass, Felix could see the silhouette of his friend, the shape of a man who had finally found something resembling peace. After years of carrying weights that would have broken lesser men. Inside that office was probably the happiest Felix had seen Dayo in years. And honestly, he was happy about it. The man deserved it. After everything that had happened, the accusations that had spread like poison through every headline, the investigations that had picked apart his life with the thoroughness of vultures stripping bones, the months of carrying pressure that would have broken most people long before they reached the other side. Dayo had endured it all, had stood in the fire and come out scarred but unbowed. And now finally, he looked at peace. The release was coming. Beautiful things building momentum with every passing day. His family was thriving. Luna smiling in ways she hadn't for months, her own return to music adding a light to their home that Felix had missed seeing. Jennifer had practically become his entire world, that tiny human having wrapped herself around his heart with the completeness that only children could manage. Life was finally treating him kindly, offering him the rewards that patience and integrity eventually brought, which was exactly why Felix was here. Because somebody had to remind him that peace didn't mean the war was over, that happiness didn't mean the threats had disappeared, that enjoying the present didn't erase the enemies still moving in the shadows. Felix knocked, the sound sharp and deliberate against the wood. Come in. Felix opened the door and stepped inside, immediately taking in the scene. Dayo sat behind his desk with a tablet resting beside him. Several reports spread across the table in organized piles that suggested he had been reviewing them. But the smile on his face, the distant quality to his eyes, told Felix he wasn't actually focused on any of it. His mind was elsewhere, probably at home, probably with Luna and Jennifer, probably in that space where work ceased to matter and family became everything. Dayo looked up, and the smile widened into genuine warmth. Felix. The detective walked in and closed the door behind him with a soft click that seemed louder than it should have. Dayo leaned back in his chair, studying Felix's face with the perceptiveness that had always made him difficult to deceive. You look like someone is about to deliver bad news. Felix sighed, running a hand through his hair as he moved toward the chair across from Dayo's desk. Not bad news, exactly. Then, a reminder. Felix sat down, the leather creaking beneath him, and folded his hands in his lap. He watched Dayo's expression carefully, saw the subtle shift as understanding began to dawn. The kind of reminder nobody wants to hear when things are finally going well. The smile on Dayo's face slowly faded slightly, not disappearing completely, but retreating into something more guarded, more aware. That was enough. Both men understood each other well enough that no further explanation was needed. They had been through too much together, had seen each other at their worst and their best, to require elaborate preambles. Dayo gestured toward the chair Felix had already occupied. Sit. I already am. Then stay sitting. Felix managed a small laugh despite the gravity of what he had come to discuss. Thanks for the permission. Dayo's expression remained serious, his eyes fixed on Felix with an intensity that suggested he was already working through possibilities, already calculating what his friend had come to say. Talk to me. Felix unfolded his hands and leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. You've been happy lately. Dayo laughed softly, the sound genuine but edged with something cautious. Is that a crime? No. Felix shook his head, his voice gentle. It's not a crime, Dayo. It's what you deserve. It's what you fought for. But, he paused, choosing his words carefully. But I think you're forgetting something. Something important. Something that doesn't disappear just because life got good again. Dayo's eyes narrowed slightly, the guard rising behind his composure, wanting to hear what he already knew the answer of. What am I forgetting, Felix? Felix studied him for a long moment, seeing the man his friend had become, the artist, the husband, the father, the survivor, but also seeing the target he still was, the enemy that still moved against him, the war that continued whether he chose to acknowledge it or not. Silas, Felix said simply, letting the name hang in the air between them like smoke. You're forgetting Silas. You're forgetting Michael. You're forgetting that while you've been building your life back, they've been building something too. And whatever they're building, Dayo, it's not going to stay hidden forever. Dayo became very still, the kind of stillness that Felix recognized from years of friendship. The moment when Dayo stopped reacting and started thinking, when the artist's sensitivity gave way to the strategist's calculation. The smile that had been lingering at the corners of his mouth disappeared completely, replaced by something harder, more focused. Tell me what you know, Dayo said quietly, his voice carrying none of the warmth from moments before. Felix reached into his jacket and withdrew a slim folder, placing it on the desk between them. We've been monitoring the database. The one we accessed during the investigation. The one that gave us insight into their operations. And something changed. Felix tapped the folder with one finger. For months, there was regular activity. Communications, financial transfers, operational updates. The kind of digital footprint that let us track their movements, predict their strategies, stay ahead of their plans. But recently, he paused, his expression darkening. Recently, it's gone quiet. Not completely silent, but significantly reduced. The frequency dropped. The detail thinned. It's like they're still using the system, but only for the most basic functions. The important conversations, the strategic planning, the real decisions, they've moved somewhere else. Dayo picked up the folder, flipping it open to scan the contents. His eyes moved quickly across pages, absorbing information with the speed that had always characterized his mind. You think they know we have access? I think it's a strong possibility. Felix leaned back, watching Dayo's reaction. Or they've upgraded their security. Or they've shifted to a different communication network entirely. Whatever the reason, our window is closing, Dayo. The intelligence we have is getting stale. The picture is getting blurry. And if we wait too long, we might lose our advantage completely. Dayo closed the folder slowly, his expression unreadable. For a long moment he sat in silence, staring at the cover as if it contained answers beyond the words printed on its pages. Then he looked up at Felix, and something had shifted in his eyes. The peace of moments before replaced by a different kind of clarity. The recognition that comfort was temporary and vigilance was permanent. So what do we do? Dayo asked, his voice calm, but carrying an edge that hadn't been there before. Felix opened his mouth to respond, but Dayo held up a hand, stopping him. Wait. Dayo stood from his desk, moving to the window that overlooked the city. He stood there for a moment, hands in his pockets, his silhouette framed against the afternoon light. When he turned back, his expression had changed again, settling into something determined, something strategic. I've been thinking about this too, Felix. Not as much as I should have, maybe. Not with the focus it deserves. But I've been thinking. He walked back to his desk, picking up a pen and turning it over in his fingers. You said they're moving into the shadows. That they're hiding their communications, burying their tracks, making themselves harder to find. He looked up, meeting Felix's eyes. That's their strength right now. The darkness. The anonymity. The fact that nobody knows where they are or what they're planning. Felix nodded, following Dayo's logic. Exactly. As long as they stay hidden. As long as they stay hidden, they control the battlefield. Dayo finished the thought, his voice gaining momentum. But what if we change the battlefield? What if we force them into the light? Felix leaned forward, interest sharpening his features. How? Dayo set the pen down and placed both hands flat on his desk, leaning toward his friend with the intensity of a man who had just seen the path forward. We leak. Not everything. Not enough to start a war we can't finish. But pieces. Carefully chosen pieces. Information that raises questions, that attracts attention, that puts pressure on the structures they've built around themselves. He picked up the folder again, tapping it against his palm. We know Silas loves the shadows. He thrives in darkness, in anonymity, in the power. That comes from being unseen and unknown. So we take that away. Gradually. Slowly. Carefully. We don't attack him directly. That would be suicide, and it would be obvious. We expose him. We make the shadows uncomfortable. We make the darkness dangerous. Felix's eyes widened as understanding dawned, followed by a slow smile of recognition. You want to use the media, public attention, government scrutiny. All of it. Dayo nodded, his voice growing more certain with each word. A man hidden in darkness is difficult to fight because you can't see him, can't predict him, can't prepare for him. But a man standing under a spotlight? A man whose every move is being watched, analyzed, questioned? That man becomes vulnerable. He makes mistakes. He reacts instead of acts. He loses the initiative. He straightened, his posture shifting from contemplative to commanding. Attention changes everything, Felix. Media attention forces explanations. Public attention forces accountability. Government attention forces investigations. And investigations create pressure. Pressure creates cracks. And cracks, he smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Cracks let the light in. After all, not everyone can't take that kind of pressure. He might be good, but when it's the media, he would be weak. Felix sat back, absorbing the strategy, his mind already working through implications. Organic leaks. Nothing that looks coordinated. Nothing that traces back to us. Exactly. Dayo pointed at him, his finger sharp and decisive. No one should think someone is targeting him. No one should see a pattern. We make it look natural, independent, random. Like different people discover different things at different times. A journalist here finds a financial discrepancy. A blogger there uncovers a connection. An analyst somewhere else notices a pattern. Each piece small enough to be dismissed alone, but together, he spread his hands. Together they form a picture that can't be ignored. Felix was nodding now, the strategy unfolding in his mind like a map revealing hidden paths. We feed anonymous journalists. Little pieces. Nothing connected. Nothing obvious. Enough to make people curious, to start asking questions, to dig deeper on their own. Dayo smiled, and this time there was genuine satisfaction in it. Now you're getting it. We don't hand them the story. We hand them breadcrumbs and let them build the trail themselves. That way, when the story breaks, it's their story, their investigation, their discovery, not ours. We remain invisible. The office became quiet as both men imagined the possibilities, the chess game unfolding across a board that spanned cities and institutions and lives. Eventually Dayo spoke again, his voice lower, more serious. Bring everything to me first. Every piece of information, every potential leak, every journalist you consider using. I want to review it personally. I want to understand the risks before we take them. Obviously, Felix's voice carried no offense at the instruction. I wouldn't move without your approval. No unnecessary risks. Dayo's eyes were hard, focused. We move carefully, Felix. More carefully than we've ever moved before. Because if Silas realizes we're behind this, if he connects even one leak back to us, He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Felix laughed, but there was little humor in it. Who do you think you're talking to? I've been careful my entire career. Dayo pointed at him, his expression softening slightly. A detective who once chased a suspect through 3 boroughs without backup. That was one time. One time too many. The two men shared a small laugh, the tension breaking momentarily before settling back into something more comfortable, more familiar. Then silence returned, more serious this time, because despite the strategy, despite the planning, neither of them knew how Silas would react. Neither of them could predict what a cornered predator might do. Eventually, Felix closed the folder, sliding it back into his jacket. I'll start organizing everything. Review what we have, identify the pieces that work, find the right channels. Good. We'll move carefully. Very carefully. Felix stood, but paused before heading toward the door. Because there was one final thing, something he hadn't said yet, something that had been sitting in his chest since he walked into this office. Dayo. Felix looked directly at him, his expression unguarded in a way that his profession rarely allowed. Thank you. Dayo blinked, caught off guard by the sincerity. For what? For listening. Felix's voice was quiet, almost rough with emotion he usually kept buried. For not dismissing me. For not telling me to let you enjoy your happiness in peace. He paused, searching for words that didn't come easily to a man trained in observation rather than expression. It would have been easy for you to stay distracted. Easy to enjoy life, to focus on your music and your family and the good things finally coming your way. Easy to pretend that the threats had disappeared, that the enemies had moved on, that the war was over just because you weren't fighting it every day. He smiled slightly, the expression sad and knowing. But you didn't. You heard me. You stopped. You remembered. And that's why I keep showing up, Dayo. Because you don't let yourself forget. Because even when you want it, you can't. Dayo looked down at his desk, then back at his friend, his expression softening into something grateful and heavy. No. He shook his head slowly. No, Felix. Thank you. For not letting me stay delusional. For not allowing me to live in fantasies that don't really exist. For being the voice that pulls me back when I drift too far toward comfort. He stood, moving around the desk to stand before his friend, and clasped his shoulder. I needed this. I needed you. Don't stop coming. Don't stop reminding me. Even when I resist. Especially when I resist. On a serious note, I knew, but just wanted to forget, so thank you. For a moment, neither man spoke. The understanding between them deeper than words could capture, built on years of trust and shared danger and the particular bond that forms between people who have seen each other at their most vulnerable. Eventually Felix nodded, the gesture small but carrying everything that needed to be said. Then he headed toward the door, his hand on the handle before he turned back. We'll talk soon. Dayo smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes, which had already returned to that distant, calculating place. Try not to get killed. Felix rolled his eyes, the familiar banter a comfort against the gravity of what they were planning. No promises. The door closed behind him with a soft click, leaving Dayo alone. The office became silent once more, the kind of silence that felt heavy with possibility and danger. He looked at the city beyond the glass, the endless sprawl of lives being lived, of people who had no idea what moved in the shadows beneath their ordinary days. Then he looked at the files resting on his desk, the tangible evidence of threats that hadn't disappeared simply because he had chosen to look away. The peace he'd been enjoying hadn't disappeared. Not at all. But now he remembered something important, something fundamental that happiness had temporarily obscured. Peace wasn't the same thing as victory. And somewhere out there, Silas was still moving. Chapter 560, several miles away. Several miles away, inside a private conference room hidden beneath layers of security and secrecy, for people sat around a long black table. The atmosphere was tense, very tense, the kind of tension that made the air feel thick and difficult to breathe. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. Because the man standing at the head of the room looked furious in a way that transcended ordinary anger. His rage contained so completely that it manifested as coldness, as stillness, as something far more dangerous than shouting or violence. Silas. His hands rested against the table, fingers spread wide, the only sign of his agitation. Eyes cold and flat, expression unreadable, which somehow made him even more terrifying than if he had been screaming. Across from him sat 4 individuals, each one carefully chosen, each one responsible for a segment of his operations, each one now feeling the weight of his displeasure like a physical pressure against their chests. Valerie, the woman who handled financial logistics, her composure fraying at the edges. Eric, the man who managed communications, his jaw tight with the effort of maintaining calm. Ulrich, who oversaw operational security, his posture rigid and defensive. And Alice, the youngest of the group, responsible for intelligence coordination, her hands clasped so tightly in her lap that her knuckles had gone white. The 4 regional coordinators responsible for one of the organization's most important operations. And right now, Silas wasn't pleased with any of them. His gaze moved across the room slowly, methodically, like a predator deciding where to strike first, where the weakness lay, where an example needed to be made. He took his time, letting the silence stretch, letting each person feel the weight of his attention before it moved on. Finally he spoke, his voice quiet, almost conversational, which made it worse. What exactly is happening? Nobody answered immediately. The question was too broad, too loaded, too dangerous to answer without knowing what specific failure had triggered this meeting. That was a mistake. Silas's voice became colder, dropping another degree that made the room feel suddenly chillier. I asked a question. I expect an answer. Not hesitation. Not calculation. An answer. Valerie straightened in her chair, her spine rigid, her voice steady despite the fear that Felix could see in her eyes. We're still investigating the discrepancies in the Southern accounts. The numbers don't align with our projections, and we're working to determine whether it's incompetence or investigating. Silas repeated the word as if tasting something rotten. You've been investigating for 3 weeks, Valerie. 3 weeks. And in that time, what have you found? Valerie swallowed, her composure cracking slightly. We've identified several irregularities. We're tracing the sources. We need more time too. Time. Silas cut her off, the word sharp as a blade. You need more time. Of course you do. He turned his gaze to Eric, who stiffened under the attention. And you? What do you need, Eric? More resources? More personnel? More excuses? Eric's jaw tightened further, his voice coming out controlled but edged with defensiveness. There haven't been any unusual developments in communications. Our channels are secure. Our protocols are being followed. If there's a leak, it's not coming from my department. Silas laughed. The sound contained absolutely no amusement, a dry, hollow thing that made the hairs on the back of Alice's neck stand up. No unusual developments. His fingers tapped the table, each impact precise and deliberate. Interesting. Very interesting. He paused, letting the silence stretch again, letting each person wonder if they were the target, if their failure had finally been discovered. Then explain something to me. Explain it slowly, because I want to be absolutely certain I understand. Nobody liked where this was going. The room seemed to shrink, the walls pressing closer, the air becoming thinner. Silas leaned forward, his voice becoming quieter, which somehow made it cut deeper. Why have I received almost no useful updates concerning Dayo? The room froze, the temperature dropping perceptibly. Silas continued, each word measured and sharp. The man is preparing a major release, a song that is already generating significant attention. His company is expanding, signing new artists, increasing its market presence. His influence is growing across multiple platforms, multiple demographics, multiple regions. And somehow, his eyes narrowed to slits. Somehow, all 4 of you expect me to believe that nothing important is happening, that there are no opportunities, that there is nothing to report, that Dayo has simply ceased to be relevant. Nobody answered, because there was no good answer. They had been focused on internal operations, on maintaining their own territories, on the day-to-day management of systems that had seemed sufficient. They had looked away from Dayo because looking at him required confronting the failure of their previous attempts, required acknowledging that he had survived everything they had thrown at him and emerged stronger. Silas stared at each of them, one after another, measuring, evaluating, judging. He saw their fear, their uncertainty, their desperate desire to say something that would deflect his attention. And he found all of it wanting. Finally, he stepped back, the physical distance somehow increasing the psychological pressure. The room felt slightly less suffocating, but only slightly, like a noose loosened by a fraction of an inch. I want answers. His voice echoed through the room, bouncing off walls that had absorbed worse threats. Real answers. Not investigations. Not updates. Not reassurances. Answers about what Dayo is doing, who he is meeting, what he is planning. I want to know who is helping him, who is protecting him, who is feeding him information. I want to know why his career is thriving while we sit here discussing our own incompetence. He paused, letting the words settle like ash. Immediately, nobody doubted him. Not for a second. Because when Silas stopped asking questions, when he shifted from demanding answers to demanding consequences, people disappeared. And nobody in that room wanted to become one of those people, another name erased from records, another body that would never be found, another cautionary tale whispered in dark corners. The meeting had only just begun, but already, the tension was thick enough to choke on. And somewhere in the silence, beneath the fear and the calculation, a question hung unspoken in the air, a realization slowly forming in the minds of four people who had thought themselves secure. If Silas was this angry about what they hadn't done to Dayo, what would he do when he learned what Dayo was planning to do to him? The answer, none of them wanted to discover. Luna woke before the sun had fully decided to rise, before the first hints of orange had begun to stain the Lagos sky, before the birds had remembered that morning was their responsibility. She lay on her side, facing the window, watching the darkness outside gradually surrender to something softer, something that promised light without yet delivering it. Beside her, Dayo slept with the deep unconsciousness of a man who had finally allowed himself peace, his breathing steady and slow, one arm thrown across the space where she had been before she shifted away from his warmth. She did not feel tired. That was the strangest thing. She had slept perhaps 4 hours, her mind too alive, too full, too electric with possibility to surrender completely to rest. Yet she felt more awake than she had in months, her body humming with an energy she had almost forgotten existed. It was the energy of anticipation, of hunger, of aliveness, the particular electricity that came from wanting something so badly that your very cells seemed to vibrate with the wanting. Luna lay very still, not wanting to disturb Dayo, and let her mind travel backward through the years. She remembered the first time she had left the industry. Not left, really fled. The music had stopped speaking to her. The melodies that once flowed like water from some inexhaustible source had dried up, leaving her standing in a desert of silence, her mouth open but no sound emerging. She had tried everything. New producers, new genres, new collaborators, but nothing had worked because the problem was not external. It was her. She had lost her touch. The music no longer resonated with whatever lived inside her, and without that resonance, she was just a woman making noise. She remembered the desperation of that time, the way she had wandered through studios and rehearsal spaces like a ghost haunting her own life. She remembered the pity in people's eyes, the careful way they spoke to her, as if her failure were contagious. She remembered deciding to leave before the industry could discard her, preserving some fragment of dignity by walking away first. And she remembered Dayo finding her in that darkness. Not rescuing her. She had never needed rescue, not really. But seeing her, truly seeing her, in a way that no one else had bothered to. He had listened to her old songs, the ones that had made her famous, and he had understood what was missing. Not talent, not skill, not even inspiration. What was missing was truth. She had been singing other people's songs, other people's styles, other people's expectations. She had never found her own sound. Dayo had given her that. He had sat with her for weeks, months, playing chords and discarding them, writing lyrics and burning them, searching for the thing that would unlock whatever door had closed inside her. And when he found it, when that first song in her true voice emerged from the chaos of their experimentation, it had been like breathing after drowning, like seeing color after blindness, like being born into a world she had always belonged to but had never known how to reach. That was their beginning. Not romance, not yet. Recognition. Two artists who saw each other clearly, who understood the loneliness of creating, who spoke a language that needed no translation. And then the second leaving. Not because she had lost her touch this time. No, she had found it, had held it, had proven she could wield it with the best of them. But because she had become pregnant with Jennifer, And the industry that had nearly destroyed her once was no place for a mother who wanted to be present, who wanted to be whole, who refused to let her child grow up watching her dissolve under spotlights and schedules and expectations that consumed everything they touched. She had left again, and this time, Amanda had left with her. Luna turned onto her back, staring at the ceiling, and felt Dayo's arm shift in his sleep, searching for her warmth without finding it. She thought about Amanda, her agent, her confidant, her best friend, the woman who had been there through both leavings, who had never judged, who had simply stood beside her and said whatever you need, whenever you need it. Amanda had built a life around Luna's absence, managing investments, handling appearances, keeping the machinery of Luna's dormant career oiled and ready for a return that neither of them had ever been certain would come. And now it had. Chapter 561. Luna is happy. And now it had. Luna smiled into the darkness, the expression feeling strange on her face after so many months of careful neutrality. She was returning. Not because she was broken, not because she was escaping, not because she had no other choice. She was returning because she was whole, because she had chosen, because the fire that Dayo had helped her discover all those years ago had never actually gone out. It had simply banked itself, waiting for air, waiting for permission, waiting for her to be ready. A sound from the baby monitor interrupted her reverie, a small rustling that quickly escalated into the unmistakable noises of Jennifer waking. Luna slipped out of bed before the sounds could become cries, before Dayo could be disturbed, her bare feet silent against the cool floor. She moved through the darkened hallway with the practiced ease of motherhood, her body knowing this route even when her mind was elsewhere. Jennifer's room was still dim, the blackout curtains holding back the encroaching dawn, but Luna could see her daughter sitting up in her crib, her small face rumpled with sleep, her dark hair standing in every direction. Jennifer looked up as Luna entered, and her expression transformed from confusion to recognition to pure, uncomplicated joy. "Mama." Luna froze in the doorway, her hand still on the frame, her heart suddenly suspended between beats. She had heard it before, of course, the random babbling, the accidental syllables, the sounds that might have been words if you listened with enough hope. But this was different. This was intentional, directed. Her name, spoken by her daughter's voice for the very first time. Jennifer reached out with both hands, her small fingers opening and closing in the universal gesture of pick me up, hold me, don't leave me here alone. "Mama, Mama." Luna moved, her body operating on instinct while her mind reeled. She scooped Jennifer into her arms, pulling her close against her chest, and felt her daughter's warmth seep into her skin, her heartbeat rapid and strong against her own. Jennifer nuzzled into her neck, her small arms wrapping around Luna with the possessive strength of someone who had not yet learned that love could be temporary. "Mama," Jennifer said again, her voice muffled against Luna's shoulder, as if confirming that the word worked, that it brought the result she wanted, that it was hers to use now. Luna felt tears streaming down her face before she realized she was crying, hot tracks against her cheeks that she made no move to wipe away. She laughed, the sound catching in her throat, half joy and half something too complex to name. Her daughter had called her Mama. On this morning, of all mornings, when everything was changing, when she was stepping back into a world she had feared might swallow her whole, her daughter had given her this. This anchor, this blessing, this proof that she was not choosing between two loves, but bringing them together. She carried Jennifer back to the master bedroom, her movements slow and deliberate, not wanting to rush this moment, not wanting to let go of the weight in her arms. Dayo was stirring awake as she entered, his eyes blinking open in the dim light, his expression shifting from sleep to confusion to concern as he took in Luna's tear-streaked face. "Luna." His voice was rough with sleep, edged with the immediate worry that always appeared when he thought something was wrong with her. "What happened? Is she okay? Are you?" "She called me Mama." Luna's voice came out thick with emotion, barely above a whisper. "Dayo, she called me Mama. For the first time. She looked at me, and she said it. She said it." Dayo's expression transformed, the concern melting into something softer, something odd. He sat up, reaching out to touch Jennifer's back, his fingers gentle against her rumpled pajamas. "She did. 3 times. Luna laughed, the sound wet and messy and utterly genuine. 3 times, Dayo. She knew. She knew it was me. She knew what it meant. Jennifer, sensing that she was the center of attention, lifted her head from Luna's shoulder and looked at Dayo with the serious expression she reserved for moments she deemed important. Dada, she said, as if reminding him that he too had a name, that she had not forgotten him in her newfound mastery of language. Dayo laughed, the sound rich and warm, and reached for both of them, pulling them onto the bed with him. They sat there together in the half-light of early morning, a family of 3, and Luna felt something settle inside her chest, something that had been restless and searching for too long. This was why she could return, not despite this, but because of this. Because she had this to come home to. Because she was not choosing between her daughter and her music. She was showing her daughter what it looked like to be whole. By mid-morning, the house had settled into its usual rhythm. Jennifer had been fed and changed, and was now occupied with a collection of wooden blocks that she mostly threw at the wall, laughing each time they clattered to the floor. Dayo had left for JD Records with promises to call later, his kiss lingering against Luna's forehead before he disappeared into the garage. And Luna had made a phone call that she had been both anticipating and dreading since she opened her eyes. Amanda, it's me. Can you come over? Now, there's something I need to tell you. In person. The pause on the other end had been brief, but loaded with Amanda's characteristic perceptiveness. I'm already in the car. Now Amanda sat in Luna's living room, her posture slightly tense, her eyes tracking Luna's movements with the sharpness of someone who had spent years reading unspoken signals. She was dressed in the casual professionalism that had become her uniform, tailored pants, a silk blouse, minimal jewelry, everything calculated to project competence without flash. Her hair was pulled back in its usual severe bun, though a few strands had escaped, suggesting she had rushed more than she wanted to admit. And she was suspicious, very suspicious, because Luna had greeted her at the door with a hug that lasted too long. Because Luna had taken her coat personally instead of calling for help. Because Luna was now in the kitchen, actually cooking, scrambling eggs, warming bread, brewing coffee with the careful attention of someone who had not performed these tasks in months, if not years. Luna. Amanda's voice carried the particular tone of someone who had reached the limit of her patience. What is going on? Luna smiled over her shoulder, the expression serene and maddening. I'm making breakfast. You rushed over without eating. I know you. You never eat when you're working. Sit. Eat. We'll talk after. After what? Amanda's eyes narrowed. After you've poisoned me? After you've revealed that you've joined a cult? After you've told me that you're moving to a remote village to raise goats? Luna, you are acting strange. You are acting like someone who has either won the lottery or committed a crime, and I cannot tell which is more likely. Luna laughed, the sound genuine and warm, and slid a plate of eggs and toast onto the coffee table in front of Amanda. She added a cup of coffee, prepared exactly how Amanda liked it. Black, no sugar, strong enough to wake the dead. Then she sat across from her friend, folding her hands in her lap, her smile widening into something that Amanda had not seen in years. Eat, Luna said softly. Then we'll talk. Amanda looked at the food, then at Luna, then back at the food. She picked up her fork with the caution of someone handling evidence at a crime scene, took a small bite, chewed slowly, her eyes never leaving Luna's face. The eggs are good, she admitted grudgingly, which only makes me more suspicious. The Luna I know doesn't cook. The Luna I know barely enters her own kitchen. The Luna I know calls for delivery and considers it self-care. I've changed. People don't change this much overnight. Amanda set down her fork, her patience finally snapping. Luna. Spill. Right now? Did you win the lottery? Are you pregnant again? Did Dayo do something? Is there trouble? Good trouble? Bad trouble? What is happening? You called me at 7 in the morning sounding like you were about to explode. You greet me at the door like I'm returning from war. You serve me food with your own hands like we're in some period drama. And now you're sitting there smiling like you know something I don't. Tell me. Luna looked at her friend, really looked at her, and felt a surge of love so fierce it nearly stole her voice. Amanda had been there through everything. The first collapse, when the music had dried up and Luna had thought she would never sing again. The discovery, when Dayo had unlocked her sound and Amanda had wept in the studio, hearing her friend come back to life. The rise, when Luna had become something bigger than she had ever imagined. and Amanda had managed it all with the fierce protectiveness of a lioness. The second leaving, when pregnancy had made Luna choose motherhood over career, and Amanda had walked away from her own thriving client list to stand beside her. They had been through too much together for Luna to draw this out any longer. "I'm coming back," she said simply, the words falling into the space between them like stones into still water. Amanda blinked. "Back from where? You didn't go anywhere. You're sitting right in front of me." "Luna, if this is a riddle, I am not in the mood for." "Back to music." Luna leaned forward, her hands reaching across the table to grasp Amanda's, her fingers warm and insistent. "Back to the industry. Back to singing, writing, performing, recording, all of it. For real this time. Not a feature. Not a cameo. Not a one-off charity appearance. I'm returning, Amanda. Fully. Completely. Dayo is signing me to JD Records. He's going to write for me, produce for me, build my team, plan my rollout. I'm coming back." The silence that followed was absolute, a vacuum that seemed to pull all sound from the room. Amanda's face went through a rapid series of transformations: confusion, disbelief, shock, and then something that looked almost like pain before finally settling into joy. Then she screamed. It was not a dignified scream. It was not the controlled exclamation of a professional woman in a professional setting. It was a full-throated, unrestrained, absolutely girlish scream of pure, unfiltered delight, the kind that Amanda would have denied herself in any other context, in any other company, at any other time. Oh my God! She was on her feet before Luna could react, pulling her up from the couch, grabbing her hands, and jumping up and down with an energy that made Luna laugh even as tears sprang to her own eyes. They jumped together, two women in their 30s behaving like teenagers who had just discovered that their favorite boy band was coming to town, their laughter mixing with tears, their grips on each other's hands tight enough to leave marks. "Luna, Amanda, you're coming back. I'm coming back. Oh my God, Luna, do you know what this means?" "I think I do." "No, you don't, because I've been planning for this for years." They collapsed back onto the couch together, still holding hands, their bodies shaking with the aftermath of release, with the catharsis of a moment that Amanda had dreamed of but never truly believed would arrive. Amanda was crying openly now, her professional mask completely discarded, her makeup smearing in ways that would have horrified her under any other circumstances. "Years," she repeated, her voice thick with emotion. "Luna, I've been ready for this call for 3 years. I've had plans. I've had strategies. I've had backup plans for my backup plans. I've watched every trend, every shift, every opportunity, waiting for the moment when you would say yes. And now," she laughed, the sound wet and messy, "now you're telling me, and I can't remember a single thing. My mind is blank. I'm useless. I'm absolutely useless." Luna squeezed her hands, her own tears tracking down her cheeks, making no move to wipe them away. "You're not useless. You're Amanda. You're the only person I wanted to tell first. The only person I needed to see when this became real." Amanda pulled her into a hug, fierce and prolonged, her arms wrapping around Luna with the strength of someone who had been holding back too much for too long. "I left with you," she whispered against Luna's hair, her voice barely audible. "Do you remember? When you said you were done, when you said you couldn't do it anymore, I walked away too. Everyone thought I was crazy. I had other clients. I had a career. But I couldn't stay in that world without you. It felt like betrayal, like pretending that what we built together didn't matter. I remember." Luna's voice was muffled against Amanda's shoulder, her own arms tight around her friend. "I never asked you to do that. I never expected." "I know." Amanda pulled back, her hands framing Luna's face, her eyes searching with an intensity that spoke of years of friendship and shared struggle. "You never asked. You would never ask. That's why I did it. Because you needed someone who chose you, not your career. Who chose you, Luna? The person, the friend, the woman who cried in my apartment at 3 a.m. because she thought she would never sing again. The woman who laughed until she couldn't breathe when we finally heard that first song in your real voice. The woman who called me from the hospital, voice shaking, telling me she was pregnant and terrified and happier than she'd ever been." She wiped Luna's tears with her thumbs, her own still flowing freely. "I chose that woman. I will always choose that woman. And now that woman is coming back, and I get to be here for it. I get to help. I get to fight for you again. Do you know what that means to me?" Luna shook her head, unable to speak past the emotion clogging her throat. "It means everything." Amanda's voice dropped, becoming almost a whisper. "It means I didn't walk away for nothing. It means the years of waiting, of preparing, of hoping against hope. They mattered. They led here." They sat in silence for a moment, foreheads touching, breathing each other's air. Two women who had seen each other at their worst and were now present for what might be their best. Then Amanda straightened, her professional instincts reasserting themselves even through her tears, her mind already clicking into the gear that had made her one of the most respected agents in the industry. "Okay." She grabbed a napkin from the table and wiped her face, her movements efficient despite the lingering tremor in her hands. "Okay, we need to talk logistics. We need to talk strategy. We need to talk about what this looks like, because Luna, I love you, but I am not letting you walk back into that industry without a plan that would make a military general weep with envy." Luna laughed, the sound lighter than she had felt in months. "Dayo is handling the label side. The production, the team, the infrastructure. He wants to do this properly, professionally, not as his wife, but as an artist." "Good." Amanda nodded sharply. "That's good. That's exactly right. But there's more to a comeback than label support and good songs. There's narrative. There's branding. There's the story we tell the world about where you've been and why you're back." She paused, her expression shifting into something more serious. "Luna, people are going to ask. They're going to want to know why you left, why you're returning now, what changed. We need to control that story before someone else writes it for us." Luna felt a flicker of the old anxiety, the familiar fear of exposure that had always accompanied her public life. But it was smaller than it would have been before, tempered by everything she had gained, everything she had survived. "What do you suggest?" Amanda was quiet for a moment, her eyes distant with calculation. Then she smiled, slow and certain. "We tell the truth, or a version of it. You left because you needed to find yourself. You stayed away because you became a mother and that mattered more than anything. And you're returning because you're ready. Because the music never left you, even when you left it. Because you have something to say that only you can say." She reached out and took Luna's hand again. "And because you have people who believe in you, who always believed in you, even when you stopped believing in yourself." Luna thought about that, turning the words over in her mind. They felt right. They felt true. Not the whole truth. No one needed to know about the darkness, about the fear, about the moments when she had wondered if she would ever feel whole again. But true enough, honest enough. "And the sound?" Luna asked. "Dayo and I haven't discussed specifics yet. We haven't had time. Everything happened so fast. The conversation, the decision, the planning. I don't even know what I want to sing. What I can sing. It's been so long, Amanda. What if my voice has changed? What if the thing that made me special is gone?" Amanda's grip tightened on her hand, her eyes fierce with conviction. "Your voice is not a magic trick, Luna. It's not something that disappears because you stopped using it for a while. It's you. It's the accumulation of everything you've experienced, everything you've felt, everything you've survived. And you've survived so much since you last stood on a stage. You've become a mother. You've rebuilt a marriage. You've found peace that you didn't think was possible." She leaned closer, her voice dropping to an urgent whisper. "That doesn't diminish your voice, Luna. That deepens it. That gives it colors and textures that didn't exist before. The Luna who sings now will not be the Luna who sang then. She will be richer, more complex, more real. And that is exactly what the world needs." Luna felt something shift inside her chest, a door opening that she had not realized was still closed. She had been afraid, was still afraid, if she was honest, that returning meant becoming someone she used to be, recapturing a version of herself that no longer existed. But Amanda was right. She was not returning to who she was. She was becoming who she was now, with everything that implied, everything she had gained and lost and learned. "Okay," she said softly, the word feeling like a commitment, a promise, a step forward into unknown territory. "Okay, let's do this. Let's plan. Let's build something." Amanda's smile returned, wide and fierce and utterly unprofessional, and she pulled Luna into another hug, this one shorter but no less fierce. "I've been waiting for this," she whispered. "I've been waiting so long." They spent the next hour talking, planning, dreaming out loud with the ease of two people who had done this before, who knew each other's rhythms, who could finish each other's sentences without effort. Amanda pulled out her tablet and began making lists, her fingers flying across the screen with the speed of someone who had been preparing for this moment for years. Luna added her own thoughts, her own desires, her own boundaries, the things she would do and the things she would not, the compromises she was willing to make and the lines she would not cross. Jennifer interrupted them twice, first with a demand for attention that Amanda met with the practiced ease of a woman who had watched her grow, and second with a nap that Luna administered with the gratitude of a mother who needed a moment of uninterrupted conversation. Through it all, the energy between them remained electric, charged with possibility and purpose and the particular joy of old friends embarking on a new adventure together. When Amanda finally stood to leave, her coat retrieved, her tablet full of notes, her eyes still slightly red from crying, she paused at the door and turned back to Luna. "You know what the best part is?" Luna shook her head, her own smile soft and wondering. "The best part is that you're not doing this alone." Amanda's voice was gentle but firm, carrying the weight of everything they had shared. "You have Dayo. You have Jennifer. You have me. You have a team that will build itself around you because people want to work with artists who are real, who are whole, who have something to say. You're not the scared girl who lost her touch anymore, Luna. You're not the pregnant woman who walked away because she didn't trust the industry to let her be a mother. You're someone who chose her moment, who claimed her power, who is returning not because she has to, but because she wants to." She opened the door, the afternoon light spilling into the hallway, and looked back one final time. "That's the story we're telling, Luna. That's the truth. And it's going to be beautiful." Then she was gone, her footsteps echoing down the path, her car starting with a familiar rumble that faded into the distance. Luna stood in the doorway for a long moment, watching the space where her friend had been, feeling the warmth of the sun against her face, the weight of everything that had been set in motion settling around her like a comfortable blanket. She closed the door slowly and turned back to her living room, to the remnants of breakfast, to the toys scattered across the floor, to the life she had built in her absence from the spotlight. Jennifer was stirring in her crib, the nap shorter than hoped, her small sounds of waking drifting down the hallway. Luna moved toward her, her steps light, her heart full, and found her daughter sitting up, rubbing her eyes with the particular grumpiness of a baby who had not slept long enough. "Mama," Jennifer said, her voice thick with sleep, the words still new enough to make Luna's breath catch. "Yes, my love." She scooped Jennifer into her arms, feeling the familiar weight, the warmth, the absolute trust. "Mama is here." She carried her to the window, where the afternoon light painted the room in shades of gold and amber, and stood looking out at the garden, at the city beyond, at the world that was waiting for her return. Jennifer nestled against her shoulder, her small hand playing with a strand of Luna's hair, her breathing slowing as she drifted back toward sleep. And Luna began to hum. Not a song she knew, not a melody she had written, just sound. Pure, unforced, emerging from somewhere deep inside her without conscious thought. It was simple, this humming, almost tuneless, but it carried something that had been missing for too long. Something that did not need perfection, or performance, or approval. Something that simply was. From the doorway, she felt rather than heard Dayo's presence. His return earlier than expected, his footsteps silent, his eyes watching her with an expression she could not see but could feel. He did not speak. He did not approach. He simply stood there, witnessing, as he had always done, as he would always do. Luna smiled into her daughter's hair and continued to hum. The sound filling the quiet room, the afternoon light, the space between who she had been and who she was becoming. Hope without fear. That was what this was. That was what she had found. And for the first time in years, she allowed herself to believe it would last. Chapter 562, Ghost. Michael sat in the center of his study, surrounded by screens that glowed with the pale blue light of information he could no longer trust. The room was deliberately cold, maintained at a temperature that kept him alert, that prevented the comfortable drowsiness that led to mistakes. He wore a dark sweater, no jacket, his sleeves rolled to the forearms in a gesture of preparation that had become habit over decades. Before him, spread across 3 monitors, were the intelligence reports from his 5 embedded assets, reports he had reviewed 100 times without seeing what they were actually telling him. Until tonight, he had been comparing them systematically, the way he approached everything, methodically, without emotion, treating the data as if it belonged to someone else's. Operation. The reports from Helena Voss's Vanguard, from Darius Cole's Meridian, from Paolo Romano's Eclipse, from Tom Kellerman's UCL, from Sarah Mitchell's MLL. 5 labels, 5 moles, 5 streams of intelligence that had flowed reliably for years, informing his decisions, shaping his strategies, allowing him to anticipate moves before his competitors knew they were making them. But something had changed. Not dramatically, not obviously. That was the cleverness of it. The reports still arrived on schedule. The intelligence still seemed actionable. But the outcomes, the actual results when he acted upon what they told him, had been wrong. Consistently, systematically wrong. He pulled up the timeline he had constructed, a color-coded spreadsheet that stretched back 18 months. In January, Derek at Eclipse had reported that Paolo was planning to sign a Nigerian Afrobeats artist. Michael had moved to block the deal through his influence with the distributor. The artist had instead signed with an independent label that had no connection to Paolo, no connection to anyone Michael recognized. A coincidence, he had thought at the time. In March, Valerie at Vanguard had reported that Helena was preparing a hostile acquisition of a mid-tier label in Berlin. Michael had prepared countermeasures, had positioned himself to benefit from the disruption. The acquisition had never materialized. Helena had instead invested in a completely different sector, digital streaming. Infrastructure, a move that made no strategic sense given her portfolio at the time. In May, Eric at Meridian had reported that Darius was planning to launch a new subsidiary focused on Latin American markets. Michael had prepared to undercut the venture before it could gain traction. The subsidiary had launched 6 months later in Southeast Asia, not Latin America, with a completely different leadership structure than Eric had described. 3 incidents, each explainable alone, each dismissible as miscommunication, changed priorities, the natural chaos of the industry. But 5 in 2 months, across all 5 labels, each report leading Michael to act on information that turned out to be precisely wrong in ways that benefited his enemies? No. Michael sat very still in his chair, his hands flat against the desk, his breathing slow and controlled. He was not a man who panicked. Panic was for people who had not spent 23 years building systems that anticipated disaster. But he admitted to himself, a man who could recognize when he had been outmaneuvered. And he had been outmaneuvered. The realization did not arrive as a shock. It arrived as a conclusion, the final piece of a puzzle he had been assembling without knowing he was building it. The reports were not wrong by accident. They were wrong by design. His moles had not made mistakes. They had been fed mistakes. Someone inside each of those labels, someone who knew about his network, who had identified his people, who had chosen not to expose them but to weaponize them, had been sending them false intelligence. And Michael, acting on that intelligence, had wasted resources, exposed his own strategies, and revealed his intentions to an enemy who watched him dance to their tune. He stood from his desk and walked to the window, his movements precise and controlled, his mind working faster than his body could follow. The city spread below him, lights flickering in windows where people lived lives of ordinary complexity, unaware that above them a man was reconstructing his understanding of his own empire. He had never been compromised like this. Not in 23 years. Not once. The labels had been under his influence for more than a decade. Some for nearly 2. He had placed people inside them, cultivated relationships, built networks of dependency that made his intelligence as reliable as the weather. And now, somehow, they had coordinated. They had discovered his people, all of his people, and instead of cutting them off, they had turned them into channels for disinformation. That required coordination. That required trust between 5 competitors who had every reason to distrust each other. That required someone to unite them. Michael turned from the window and returned to his desk, his expression settling into something harder than concern, colder than worry. Someone had done this. Someone had identified his network, convinced 5 label heads to cooperate, and orchestrated a deception campaign that had cost him millions and exposed his strategic thinking to anyone paying attention. The name came to him unbidden, unwelcome, inevitable. Dayo. But no, Dayo was an artist. A talented one, certainly. A surprisingly resilient one, yes. But this level of strategic thinking, this patience, this understanding of Michael's own methods, this was not the work of a musician. This was the work of someone who thought like Michael, someone who had studied him, someone who had learned his patterns and turned them against him. Unless Dayo was not merely an artist. Michael dismissed the thought as quickly as it arrived. Dayo had resources now, certainly. He had built JD Records into something formidable. But this kind of operation, identifying 5 embedded assets, convincing 5 competitors to cooperate, maintaining the deception for over a year without a single leak, required infrastructure that Dayo did not possess. Required knowledge of Michael's systems that Dayo could not have acquired. Unless someone had given it to him, at least this was Michael's thought. Michael sat down and pulled up a fresh screen, his fingers moving across the keyboard with the speed of a man who had spent his life learning to extract information from systems that resisted extraction. He would not solve this tonight. He would not identify the architect of his humiliation in a single sitting. But he would begin. He would start the process that would lead him to whoever had done this, and when he found them, he would teach them why no one who challenged Michael Erickson survived the lesson. But first, he needed new eyes. His existing network was poisoned. Every report from every asset was now suspect. He could not act on their intelligence without verifying it independently, and verification would take time he did not have. He needed someone new, someone outside his existing channels, someone with no connection to him, no history that could be traced, no vulnerability that could be exploited. He picked up his phone and dialed a number he had not used in months. The line connected after 3 rings, and a voice answered with professional neutrality. "Yes, Mr. Michael." "Tiffin." Michael's voice was calm, controlled, giving no indication of the crisis he was managing. "I need you to do something for me. Something sensitive. Something that does not appear in any record, any file, any communication that could be intercepted." "Of course, sir." Tiffin's voice did not change, did not indicate surprise or concern. She had been with him for 7 years, had handled matters that would have destroyed lesser assistants, and had never once questioned an instruction. That was why she remained. "What do you need?" "I need a specialist. Someone who operates in the shadows. Someone who builds identities, infiltrates organizations, extracts information without leaving traces." Michael paused, choosing his words with precision. "I need someone who does not exist in any database you can access through conventional means. Find them on the dark web. Use the secure channels we established for the Uruguay operation. Pay whatever they require. But find me someone who can walk into an organization and become invisible within it." There was a brief pause on the other end, the only indication that Tiffin was processing the unusual nature of the request. "Understood, sir." "Timeline. As urgent as now." Michael's voice carried no urgency, because urgency was a sign of weakness. But the word itself was its own pressure. "Begin immediately. Contact me only through the dead drop. No phone calls. No emails. Nothing that could connect you to me or this request." "Understood." The line went dead. Michael set the phone down and returned to his screens, his mind already moving to the next phase of his response. Tiffin would find someone. She always did. But finding the asset was only the first step. The second step was giving them a target, and for that, he needed to choose carefully. He reviewed the 5 labels again, his eyes moving across their names, their leadership, their recent histories. Vanguard, with Helena's cold competence. Meridian, with Darius's careful rebuilding. Eclipse, with Paolo's nervous energy. MLL, with Sarah's quiet persistence. And UCL. Tom Kellerman's label had been the weakest of the 5 for years, ever since Michael had publicly humiliated him and had Ulrich sacked. Kellerman had never recovered fully from the retirement home for irrelevant artists comment. His market share had declined. His artist roster had aged without replenishing. His influence within the industry had diminished to the point where other executives spoke of him with pity rather than respect. But UCL had something the others did not. UCL had Luna. Michael's fingers stilled on the keyboard as the connection formed in his mind. Luna had been UCL's flagship artist before she left, before she disappeared into motherhood and marriage and whatever private life she had built with Dayo. Her departure had wounded Kellerman more than Michael's insult and Ulrich. Not financially, though her sales had been significant, but symbolically. She had been his proof that UCL could still matter, still discover and develop artists who shaped the culture. Without her, UCL had become exactly what Michael had called it, a repository for artists whose best years were behind them. Kellerman would be desperate. Desperate men made mistakes, certainly, but they also made opportunities. A desperate man could be manipulated. A desperate man could be leveraged. A desperate man could be made to create openings where none existed. Michael smiled, the expression cold and precise. UCL would be his target, not because it was the weakest, though it was. Not because Kellerman was vulnerable, though he was. But because UCL represented something the other labels did not, a direct connection to the man who had taken everything from Michael's operation and made it his own. Dayo had Luna, who was once their top artist, as a girlfriend. Michael would take UCL for expansion. The phone on his desk buzzed. A secure line, the one Tiffin used only for matters that could not wait. Michael answered. Sir. Tiffin's voice was as neutral as ever, but carried the slight satisfaction of a task completed efficiently. I have made contact. The specialist goes by the designation Ghost. No real name provided. No location. Payment in cryptocurrency, released in stages upon verification of completed objectives. They have accepted the initial terms and await assignment details. Ghost. Michael rolled the name across his tongue, finding it theatrical but acceptable. In his experience, people who chose dramatic names either had the skills to justify them or were dead within 6 months. He would determine which category this ghost belonged to soon enough. Tell them the target is UCL Records, Tom Kellerman's organization. They are to obtain employment within the company. Any position that provides access to executive communications, strategic planning, or artist development decisions. They are to report only to me. No intermediaries. No documentation. No electronic communication that could be intercepted. Understood, sir. And the timeline for insertion? Michael considered. Kellerman would not simply hire a stranger off the street. Not for any position that mattered. UCL was weakened, but not careless. Ghost would need credentials, background, a history that could withstand scrutiny. That took time. Time Michael did not want to spend watching his enemies consolidate their position while he waited. I will create the opening, he said, the decision forming as he spoke. Tell Ghost to be ready within 72 hours. The position will be available. Their only task is to secure it and begin reporting. 72 hours, sir. I'll relay the instruction. The line went dead. Michael set the phone down and turned to his secure terminal, the one that connected to networks that did not officially exist, to databases that had been compiled over decades of careful observation and strategic collection. He had files on everyone who mattered in the industry, files on their finances, their relationships, their indiscretions, their vulnerabilities. He did not use them often. Blackmail was a crude tool, effective but revealing, and Michael preferred the subtle manipulation of incentives to the blunt force of threats. But when subtlety failed, when time ran short, when the stakes justified the exposure, then he used what he had. He searched for UCL executives, filtered for positions that would provide the access Ghost required, narrowed to individuals with vulnerabilities that could be exploited quickly, decisively, without room for negotiation or delay. The name emerged within minutes. Richard Holloway, Senior Vice President of Artist Development, 15 years at UCL, responsible for scouting, signing, and developing new talent. The position Ghost needed, or close enough to it that proximity would suffice. And Richard Holloway had a problem. Michael pulled up the file, reviewing details he had collected years ago and refreshed periodically, the way a gardener tends plants that may one day bear fruit. Holloway had a gambling habit. Not recreational, compulsive, destructive, the kind that had accumulated debts far beyond his executive salary. Debts to people who did not accept bankruptcy as resolution. Debts that had nearly destroyed him 5 years ago, until an anonymous benefactor had intervened, paid his creditors, and established a payment plan that Holloway had been following with desperate precision ever since. The anonymous benefactor had been Michael. He had not collected on that debt, had not even reminded Holloway of its existence. That was the patience that had built his empire, the willingness to invest and leverage and wait for the moment when its deployment would yield maximum return. That moment had arrived. Michael opened a secure messaging application, one that routed through 7 jurisdictions and deleted itself after reading. He composed a message with the same care he applied to everything. Each word chosen for precision. Each implication clear without being explicit. Richard, I hope this finds you well. It has been some time since we last communicated, and I have been pleased to see your continued success at UCL. However, I find myself in need of a small favor. Recent developments require that a colleague of mine join your organization in a capacity that provides insight into artist development strategy. The position currently held by your Senior Vice President of Artist Development would be ideal. I trust you understand the urgency and will make the necessary arrangements within 72 hours. In exchange, your remaining obligations will be considered settled in full. I have attached documentation for your review. Please confirm receipt and intent to comply. He attached 3 files. The first, records of Holloway's gambling debts, meticulously documented. The second, records of the payments Michael had made to resolve them, equally meticulous. The third, a series of communications between Holloway and a young artist he had developed a personal relationship with. Communications that, if made public, would destroy his career and his marriage with equal efficiency. Michael reviewed the message once, then sent it. He did not wait for a response. Holloway would comply. Men in his position always complied when the alternative was destruction. The only question was whether he would do so with the grace of someone who understood his position or the desperation of someone who still believed he had options. Either way, the result would be the same. Within 72 hours, UCL would have a vacancy in its Senior Vice President of Artist Development position. Within 72 hours, Ghost would apply, interview, and be hired. Within 72 hours, Michael would have new eyes inside the organization that connected most directly to his true enemy. He leaned back in his chair and looked at the darkened screens around him, the city invisible beyond his windows. The peace he had enjoyed, the illusion of control, the belief that his network was secure, his intelligence reliable, had been shattered. But Michael was not a man who mourned illusions. He was a man who adapted, who rebuilt, who struck back with greater force than whatever had been used against him. Someone had turned his own moles against him. Someone had united 5 competitors who should never have trusted each other. Someone had proven that Michael Erickson was not the only invisible hand in the room. That someone had made a mistake. They had shown him their capabilities. They had demonstrated that they understood his methods well enough to counter them. But in doing so, they had also revealed that they feared him. You did not build elaborate deceptions against enemies you considered insignificant. You built them against threats you took seriously. Michael took that seriously. He would find them. He would identify them. He would strip away every layer of protection they had built until they stood exposed and vulnerable, the way they had tried to expose him. And then he would teach them why, for 23 years, no one who challenged Michael Erickson had survived to challenge him twice. He smiled, the expression cold and precise and utterly without warmth. Somewhere across the country, Richard Holloway was reading a message that would end his career at UCL. Somewhere in the digital darkness, a specialist called Ghost was preparing to become someone else entirely. And somewhere in the network of alliances his enemies had built, a single thread was beginning to unravel. Michael would find that thread, and he would pull until everything came apart. Chapter 563, Richard Holloway. Richard Holloway sat behind a desk that cost more than most people's cars, in an office designed to project the permanence of success, and felt the floor tilt beneath him. The message had arrived 7 minutes ago. He had read it 3 times. Now he sat very still, his phone resting face down on the mahogany surface as if hiding it might undo its contents, his hands flat against the leather blotter where his initials were embossed in gold. The afternoon light filtered through floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a view of the city he had spent 15 years climbing to reach, and he could not have said what color the sky was if his life depended on it. Recent developments require that a colleague of mine join your organization. He closed his eyes. The words were polite, measured, the language of a man who had all the time in the world and all the leverage necessary to shape it. But beneath the courtesy, Holloway heard exactly what Michael intended him to hear. The blade against his throat, the hand that had placed it there, the patience that had waited 5 years to press. He remembered the night Michael had saved him. Not saved, purchased. The distinction had seemed academic at the time, when men with broken noses and plausible deniability were explaining the mathematics of compound interest applied to gambling debts. Holloway had owed $240,000 to people who collected in ways that left no paper trail for hospitals to follow. He had been 38 years old, newly divorced, his career at UCL hanging by the thread of reputation he was systematically shredding. He had stood in a parking garage at 2 in the morning, the smell of exhaust and rain and his own fear mixing in his lungs, and Michael Erickson had appeared from nowhere with an offer that sounded like mercy. The payments had been manageable, structured, professional. Holloway had received statements, schedules, the illusion of a loan being retired through discipline and good faith. He had told himself that Michael was simply a businessman who recognized talent and invested accordingly. He had told himself that the debt would eventually disappear, that he would emerge clean, that the arrangement would fade into memory like a medical procedure survived in youth. He had told himself many things. Now, reading Michael's message for the fourth time, he understood that none of them had been true. The debt had never been financial. It had always been something else entirely. Something that accumulated interest not in dollars, but in obligation, that grew not smaller with payment, but larger with time. Michael had not been collecting money. He had been collecting him, piece by piece, year by year, until the moment arrived when the investment would yield its return. That moment was now. Holloway opened his eyes and looked at his reflection in the darkened screen of his phone. A man of 53, silver-haired, well-dressed, the image of executive competence that he had cultivated through decades of careful performance. Beneath that image, he saw something else. A gambler who had never stopped gambling, who had simply changed the game to one where the stakes were invisible until they weren't. He felt anger then, hot and sudden and entirely useless. He wanted to throw the phone through the window, to call Michael's bluff, to stand before the board and confess everything before Michael could expose it. He wanted to be the kind of man who faced destruction with his head raised, who chose the timing of his own fall rather than submitting to another's orchestration. But he was not that man. He had never been that man. He was the man who stood in parking garages at 2 in the morning, who accepted offers that sounded like mercy because he lacked the courage to refuse them, who built careers on foundations of borrowed dignity and called it achievement. He was the man who would comply, who had always been going to comply, because the alternative was not merely destruction but exposure, the revelation of every compromise, every weakness, every carefully constructed lie that constituted his professional existence. And more than destruction, more than exposure, Holloway feared the unknown quantity of what Michael might do. He had heard stories, not the public stories of ruined careers and vanished fortunes. Those were the visible outcomes, the tip of an iceberg whose submerged mass Holloway could only imagine. He had heard the other stories, whispered in industry bathrooms and private clubs, about people who had challenged Michael Erickson and simply stopped existing in any form that mattered. Not dead exactly, just gone, removed from records, from memory, from the collective consciousness of an industry that learned quickly not to ask questions. Holloway did not want to become a story whispered in bathrooms. He picked up his desk phone and dialed a number he had not used for anything significant in months, a number that belonged to the person who knew his rhythms better than anyone alive. Margaret. His voice came out steady, professional, giving no indication of the earthquake beneath his composure. I need you in my office. Now, bring everything we have on the Senior Vice President of Artist Development. Everything, cataloged by severity. And Margaret, he paused, choosing his words with the precision of a man who had spent his life speaking in code. I mean, everything. Any fault that could be found. Any indiscretion that could be documented. Any pattern that might, under scrutiny, appear problematic. Do you understand? The silence on the other end lasted precisely 2 seconds. Holloway counted them, his heart hammering against his ribs, wondering if he had been too vague, too subtle, if Margaret's 7 years of service had not actually taught her to read between the lines he was drawing. I understand, sir. Her voice was unchanged, neutral, professional. But something in the cadence, something in the slight emphasis on understand, told Holloway that she had indeed understood. Completely. Immediately. Without need for elaboration. How long? 2 hours. Perhaps 3, if the older files require retrieval from storage. 2 hours. He made it a statement rather than a question, imposing urgency without explaining its source. I'll be waiting. He set the phone down and stood from his desk, moving to the window on legs that felt slightly unsteady. The city sprawled below him, indifferent to his crisis. Millions of people living lives that did not involve Michael Erickson or blackmail or the slow dismantling of identities built on compromise. He envied them with an intensity that surprised him. He envied their ordinary fears, their ordinary hopes, their ordinary problems that could be solved through ordinary means. For 2 hours, Holloway did not sit. He paced the length of his office, from window to door to bookshelf. To window again, his mind working through scenarios that all ended in the same place. He could not refuse Michael. He could not expose Michael without exposing himself more completely. He could not simply resign and disappear, because Michael's documentation would follow him, would find him, would reduce whatever life he tried to build to ashes. The only path forward was compliance dressed as initiative, submission disguised as strategy, his own destruction presented as corporate reform. The knock came precisely 1 hour and 57 minutes later. Enter. Margaret stepped through the door, and Holloway felt his breath catch at the sight of what she carried. Files. Dozens of them. Stacked in her arms. Organized in color-coded folders that spoke of a system he had not requested but was grateful to receive. She moved with the efficiency that had made her indispensable, arranging the materials across his conference table in 3 distinct groups, each labeled with a small card in her precise handwriting. Negligible. She indicated the smallest stack, perhaps 6 folders. Procedural lapses, minor expense irregularities, interpersonal conflicts that reflect poorly but not fatally. Useful for establishing pattern, insufficient for decisive action. She moved to the second group, larger, perhaps 15 folders. Significant. Financial misconduct, ethical breaches, conflicts of interest that have accumulated over years. Documented, verifiable, damaging if exposed. These would justify disciplinary action, possibly termination with cause. Then she paused, her hand resting on the third group. The largest. The one that made Holloway's stomach tighten with recognition of what he was about to see. These. Margaret's voice dropped slightly, the only indication that even her professional composure was affected. These began approximately 18 months ago, coinciding with a specific departure from this organization. The files suggest that prior to this departure, such documentation would have been unnecessary. That the individual in question maintained standards that prevented the accumulation of material in this category. She stepped back, her hands folding in front of her, her eyes meeting Holloway's with something that might have been understanding, might have been judgment, might have been simply the exhaustion of someone who had spent 2 hours cataloging the moral decay of an organization she had once believed in. Ulrich, Holloway said. Not a question. Yes, sir. Margaret's voice was steady. Ulrich Brenner, former executive vice president of UCL. He departed UCL to join JD Records approximately 5 years ago. Prior to his departure, the files in this category are sparse. After his departure, she gestured toward the stack, her hand moving with something almost like sorrow. The documentation is extensive. Complaints ignored. Standards lowered. Processes circumvented. The corruption, as documented here, became systematic, rather than exceptional. Holloway moved to the table, his fingers touching the folders without opening them. He felt the weight of what they contained, the accumulated evidence of an organization's decline measured in paper and ink, and the silent testimony of people who had watched standards erode and said nothing. Ulrich signed Luna. Holloway said softly, the memory surfacing from years ago. Fought for her. Refused to let her go to Vanguard or Meridian despite better offers. Built the artist development program around her potential. He looked at Margaret, seeing in her expression the same recognition he felt. When he left, we didn't just lose competence. We lost, he searched for the word. Conscience. The person who made us better than we wanted to be. Yes, sir. Holloway opened the top folder in the third stack. The contents were meticulously organized. Photocopies of expense reports with suspicious patterns, email chains documenting ethical compromises, witness statements describing behavior that ranged from unprofessional to potentially criminal. The name on the folder was not Ulrich's. It was the current senior vice president of artist development, a man named Harold Vance who had ascended to his position through a combination of seniority and the vacuum left by Ulrich's departure. He read through the files with a detachment that surprised him. Vance had been accepting kickbacks from talent scouts. falsifying expense reports, maintaining inappropriate relationships with young artists in development. The documentation was thorough, damning, more than sufficient to justify immediate termination and potentially criminal prosecution. But as Holloway read, he felt something else beneath his professional assessment. Recognition. The patterns Vance had fallen into, compromise after compromise, each one small enough to justify, each one building on the last until the accumulated weight became structural, were patterns Holloway knew intimately. He was reading his own biography in another man's files, seeing his own moral architecture reflected in Vance's failures. He was not better than this. He was simply more careful. For 3 hours, Holloway sat with the files, reviewing, cross-referencing, building in his mind the narrative he would present. Not the true narrative, never that. Not the story of a man blackmailed into manufacturing a vacancy for Michael Erickson's asset, but a story that would serve the same purpose while preserving his dignity, his image, his carefully constructed self. He would frame it as reform, as courage, as the difficult decision of a loyal executive who had watched standards decline and could no longer remain silent. The report took shape slowly, crafted with the care of a man who understood that language was weaponry, that tone was strategy, that the difference between victim and villain often lay in the adjectives chosen. He wrote of UCL's glorious past, of the standards that had once defined the organization, of the artists who had emerged from its development pipeline to shape the industry. He wrote of decline, of erosion, of the slow abandonment of principles that had once been non-negotiable. He wrote of responsibility, of accountability, of the necessity of example. And he proposed, with what he hoped sounded like regret rather than calculation, that the organization demonstrate its commitment to restored integrity by removing a senior figure whose conduct, while perhaps understandable in context, could no longer be tolerated. He named Harold Vance. He named the position. He named the necessity. He did not name himself as the replacement, because there would be no replacement. Only Michael's asset, Ghost, arriving to fill the vacuum Holloway was creating. He did not name Michael, because Michael existed in this document only as absence, as the force that had shaped Holloway's prose without appearing in it. When he finished, Holloway read the document 3 times. The first reading confirmed that it sounded convincing. The second confirmed that it sounded principled. The third confirmed that he could almost believe it himself, could almost forget the blackmail that had birthed it and see only the reformer's zeal, the loyalist's sorrow, the executive's difficult wisdom. Almost. He printed the document on official UCL letterhead, signed it with a flourish that suggested confidence rather than desperation, and placed it in a leather portfolio that had been a gift from his second wife, back when he still had wives and gifts and the illusion that his life was his own. Then he stood. He looked around his office, the desk, the windows, the city view, the accumulated trophies of a career built on compromise, and felt something tear inside him, something fundamental and irreparable. He was not just sacrificing Harold Vance. He was sacrificing the last fragment of himself that had believed in something beyond survival. He was becoming, fully and finally, the instrument of another man's will, and he was doing so with such skill that no one watching would recognize the puppet for what it was. Margaret was gone, dismissed hours ago with instructions to file the remaining materials according to standard protocols. The office was silent, the building around him emptied of everyone except security and the occasional executive working late, pretending that dedication could compensate for whatever emptiness drove them to remain. Holloway walked to the door. Each step felt measured, deliberate, part of a performance whose audience was himself. He was aware of his posture, straight, confident, the walk of a man with important business. He was aware of his expression, serious, concerned, the face of a man bearing difficult news for the greater good. He was aware of his breathing, steady, controlled, the respiration of someone who had not spent the afternoon reading his own moral collapse in another man's files. The hallway stretched before him, carpeted in colors designed to soothe, lit by fixtures that simulated natural illumination. Holloway passed offices he had walked by 1,000 times, nodded at a security guard who recognized him, pressed the elevator button with a finger that did not tremble. Tom Kellerman's office was on the executive floor, 3 levels above his own. The elevator rose with mechanical indifference, its numbers changing with the slow certainty of fate. Holloway watched them shift, each digit marking his approach to a conversation that would alter multiple lives, including his own, in ways that would not be fully visible for months or years. The elevator doors opened. Holloway stepped into a corridor he had walked many times before, each visit carrying the weight of whatever business had brought him. This corridor was different. This visit was different. Everything that followed would be shaped by what happened in the next hour, and Holloway understood with perfect clarity that he was no longer the author of his own story. He was a character in Michael's narrative, playing a role assigned to him, speaking lines written by another's intention. Kellerman's office door stood at the end of the corridor, polished wood with a nameplate that had not changed in years. Holloway approached it with the steady pace of a man who had rehearsed this moment, who had constructed his performance so thoroughly that it had become indistinguishable from intention. He reached the door. He raised his hand to knock, and paused. For one final breath, one final moment of suspended time, Richard Holloway stood with his fist inches from polished wood and felt the full weight of what he was about to do. He felt Harold Vance's future collapsing, the man's family receiving news that would shatter their understanding of who he was. He felt Michael Erickson's satisfaction, the cold pleasure of a plan executed with precision. He felt his own continued existence, purchased at the cost of another's destruction, maintained through the same moral calculus that had defined his entire career. He felt, beneath all of this, something small and desperate and almost human, a voice that whispered no with the futility of conscience in a world that had long since learned to ignore it. Then he knocked. The sound was sharp, authoritative, the knock of a man with important business and the confidence to deliver it. From within, Kellerman's voice, "Come in." Holloway reached for the handle, his fingers closing around cold brass, and pushed the door open. Chapter 564, Rose. The meeting had stretched across 4 hours, consuming the afternoon and bleeding into evening, until the light through the conference room windows shifted from gold to amber to the deep violet of a Lagos night. Dayo sat at the head of the table, his posture relaxed but his attention absolute, listening as Alice walked through the final integration timeline for Luna's return. Around him, the core team had settled into the kind of focused exhaustion that came from wrestling with details that mattered. Wayne arguing for a staggered announcement strategy, Valerie pressing for international coordination, Ulrich quietly noting operational dependencies that no one else had considered. They had reached consensus on the essential point: silence. No press release. No social media hints. No industry whispers. Luna's return would remain locked within this room until every piece was positioned, every contingency prepared, every advantage secured. The element of surprise was not merely strategic, it was protective. After what had happened before, after the industry had consumed her once and nearly taken their relationship and daughter with it, Dayo would not allow speculation to outrun preparation. Luna would step back into the light when she was ready, on terms they controlled completely. "So we're agreed," Alice said, her voice carrying the particular crispness of someone who had been managing complexity for hours and was ready to impose finality. No external communication until Phase 3. Internal team only. Code name for all references. She paused, looking down at her notes. Project Homecoming. Dayo nodded, his eyes moving across the table, touching each face in turn. Wayne, who had argued hardest for the staggered approach. Valerie, whose international contacts would need careful management. Ulrich, whose operational mind had already identified 3 potential leaks they would need to plug. And Alice. He held her gaze a fraction longer than the others, a silent communication that carried weight beyond the professional. Her cheeks flushed, not dramatically, not obviously, but enough that Wayne noticed, his eyebrows rising with theatrical interest. "Oh." Wayne's voice cut through the settling quiet, rich with mischief. "Did we just witness something? Should I leave the room?" Alice turned on him with the speed of someone who had spent years deflecting Wayne's provocations. "If you don't stop. I'm simply observing. You're simply insufferable." "That too." "Dayo." Alice's voice rose, not with genuine anger, but with the exasperated theatricality of someone who needed an exit from embarrassment. Tell him to stop." Dayo said nothing, merely smiled, the particular smile that had always made Alice want to throw things at him. the smile that acknowledged their history without diminishing their present, that honored what had been without pretending it still was. "You are impossible," Alice announced to the room, to Dayo, to the universe itself. "Both of you. All of you. I am surrounded by children in executive clothing." But she was laughing as she said it, the flush in her cheeks fading into something warmer, something that looked almost like gratitude. The room laughed with her, the tension of 4 hours of strategic planning dissolving into the comfortable chaos of people who had become family through shared purpose. Dayo watched them, felt the warmth of it, the rare privilege of leading people he genuinely trusted. He thought, briefly, of what Alice had been to him once. Not love, not truly, but something adjacent, something that had filled a space before Luna arrived to claim it completely. They had both known, without ever speaking it directly, that whatever possibility existed between them could not survive Luna's entrance into his life. Alice had accepted this with the grace that defined her, had stepped back without resentment, had transformed whatever she felt into loyalty that ran deeper than any romance. He had never thanked her properly for that. Perhaps he never could. Some debts were too large for words. "All right." Dayo stood, the movement drawing everyone's attention, signaling conclusion. "We're done." "Alice." He held her gaze again, serious now. Tight lips. "This stays in this room until I say otherwise." Her expression shifted, understanding passing between them, the weight of what they had once been and what they had become. "Always," she said quietly. "You know that." He did. The team dispersed slowly, exhaustion replacing adrenaline, conversations fragmenting into individual departures. Dayo gathered his materials with deliberate patience, letting the others leave before him, savoring the quiet that settled after their energy withdrew. When he finally walked through the darkened offices of JD Records, the building felt almost sacred in its emptiness, the spaces where music was made, and careers were shaped now hushed and waiting. The drive home took longer than usual, Lagos evening traffic compressing into its usual density of headlights and impatience. Dayo did not mind. He used the time to let the meeting settle in his mind, to review decisions made and anticipate challenges approaching. But beneath the professional processing, anticipation built with each kilometer. He would see Luna. He would see Jennifer. The two anchors that made everything else, the meetings, the strategies, the weight of running an empire, matter. He pulled into the driveway expecting the usual signs of domestic life. Jennifer's light, perhaps, visible through her window. Luna's silhouette in the kitchen, preparing something for dinner. The sounds of a household that had learned to function around his unpredictable schedule. Instead, silence. The house sat dark and still, no lights visible from the street, no movement behind the windows. Dayo felt a flicker of concern. Quick, automatic, the reflex of a man who had learned that absence often preceded bad news. He killed the engine and sat for a moment, listening, watching, his mind cycling through explanations that ranged from mundane to catastrophic. Then he opened the door and smelled roses. Not the subtle suggestion of a garden in bloom, but the deliberate, immersive presence of flowers arranged throughout a space. The scent reached him before his eyes adjusted, wrapping around him like an embrace he had not expected. He stepped inside, closing the doors softly behind him, and the world transformed. The entryway, usually lit by practical fixtures, glowed with warm red light, soft, pulsing, intimate. Roses lined the console table, spilled from vases on the floor, climbed the staircase in arrangements that looked less like decoration and more like art. Petals scattered across the marble floor, forming a path that led upward, into the house, into whatever waited above. And music, Luna's voice, unmistakable, unpolished, raw with the quality that had first drawn him to her years ago. Not a studio recording, not a performance for any audience. Just her, singing in the space above him, the sound intimate and unguarded, the way she only ever sang when she believed no one was listening. Dayo stood frozen in the entryway, his coat still on, his keys still in his hand, his mind struggling to process what his senses were delivering. He had expected dinner, expected conversation, expected the comfortable domesticity that had become their rhythm. He had not expected theater. He had not expected ritual. He had not expected to walk into their home and find himself transported into something that felt sacred and dangerous, and entirely outside his preparation. He composed himself with effort, setting his keys on the console with deliberate care, hanging his coat with the precision of a man who needed the ordinary gesture to ground him. Then he followed the path. The pedals led him through spaces he knew by heart, transformed by light and scent into something unfamiliar. The living room, usually bright and open, glowed red and shadowed. The furniture pushed back to create passage. The kitchen, where Luna spent so many hours, dark and silent, abandoned for whatever purpose drove tonight. The hallway, lined with more roses, their fragrance intensifying until it felt like breathing her presence. The staircase rose before him, petals scattered across each step like breadcrumbs in a fairy tale, leading upward toward the source of the music. Luna's voice grew clearer as he climbed, the song taking shape. An old one, he realized. One of her early compositions, from before the industry had shaped her, before the pressure had changed her sound. A song about finding home in another person's heartbeat. A song she had sung for him once, years ago, in a moment of vulnerability he had never forgotten. He reached the landing. The master bedroom door stood open, light spilling from within, red and warm and inviting. The music came from inside, from speakers he could not see, filling the space with her voice as if she were present in every note. Dayo moved toward the door, his steps slow, his breathing controlled, his heart hammering against his ribs with an intensity that made him feel young and uncertain and completely unprepared. She stood by the window, her back to him, silhouetted against the city lights beyond the glass. The dress was red, not the red of celebration, not the red of passion uncomplicated, but something deeper, something that spoke of intention and risk and the particular courage of a woman offering herself completely. It clung to her in ways that revealed the shape of her, the curve of her spine, the line of her shoulders, the length of her legs beneath fabric that stopped precisely where imagination demanded continuation. Elegant, yes. Sexy, certainly. But more than either, deliberate. Every choice made, every exposure calculated, every suggestion offered with the confidence of someone who knew exactly what she was doing. She did not turn as he entered, merely continued singing, her voice filling the space between them, the final notes of the song trembling with emotion she made no effort to hide. When the last word faded, she stood still for a moment, her head tilted toward the window, as if gathering courage or savoring anticipation. Then she turned. The dress moved with her, catching the light, revealing and concealing in rhythm with her motion. Her face, when it met his, carried an expression he had not seen in years, not since before Jennifer, before the second leaving, before the careful reconstruction of their marriage. It was the look of Luna unguarded, Luna without defense, Luna offering everything and demanding nothing in return. Dayo walked toward her slowly, each step measured, his mind racing with questions that his body seemed determined to ignore. He stopped an arm's length away, close enough to smell her perfume. Beneath the roses, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from her skin, close enough to see the pulse beating in her throat. Why? The word came out rougher than he intended, stripped of the eloquence he usually commanded. Luna, what is all this? She smiled, and the expression transformed her face into something that made his breath catch. Because you never asked for anything. Her voice was soft, intimate, pitched for the space between them alone. Because when I told you I wanted to return, you didn't ask what I would give you in return. You didn't calculate the cost, didn't weigh the benefit, didn't treat it like a transaction. She stepped closer, close enough that her hand could touch his chest, her palms settling over his heart. You just said yes. You said yes to all of it. To the work, the risk, the uncertainty. To me. Her fingers pressed slightly, feeling his heartbeat against her palm. So this is my thank you, Dayo. For being the most supportive partner I could have imagined. For treating my return like it mattered, like I mattered, not as an asset or a project or a favor you were doing your wife. For making me feel like I was coming home to myself, not just to an industry. Dayo felt something shift in his chest, something fundamental and tender, the particular vulnerability that only she had ever been able to reach. He opened his mouth to respond, to tell her that no thanks were necessary, that her happiness was its own reward, that he would do it. All again 1,000 times. And noticed the silence. the absence that had registered when he first entered, but had been overwhelmed by everything else. No sounds from Jennifer's room. No baby monitor static. No distant fussing that would have pulled Luna's attention away. "Where is my daughter?" The question emerged before he could stop it. Automatic, the reflex of a father whose child was not where expected. Luna's expression transformed. The tenderness remained, but something else joined it. Exasperation, theatrical offense, the particular look of a woman who had prepared something extraordinary and been asked about household logistics. "Dayo." Her voice carried the weight of disbelief. "I am standing here in this dress, in this light, having arranged all of this for you. And your first question is about Jennifer?" He laughed, could not help himself. The sound escaped rich and genuine, the particular amusement that only she could provoke, the recognition of his own failure to read the moment. "I didn't say it was my first question. It was literally your second sentence. And I am appropriately overwhelmed by everything you've done. Are you? But I am also a father who notices when his daughter is not in her bed at bedtime. And I am asking, with all appropriate appreciation for the roses and the lighting and the dress that is making it very difficult for me to concentrate." He paused, his eyes traveling down her form despite his best intentions before, forcing them back to her face. "Where is my daughter?" Luna stared at him for a long moment, her expression cycling through offense, amusement, and something softer that she tried to hide behind theatrical irritation. "You are impossible. You've said that before. I will say it again. Frequently." But she was smiling now, the performance cracking to reveal genuine warmth beneath. "Jennifer is with your mother. Abishala came this afternoon. I told her we needed the night." She understood immediately. Luna's smile turned knowing. Perhaps too immediately. She packed Jennifer's bag with a speed that suggested she had been waiting for this request. Dayo felt the information settle, felt his concern dissolve into something else entirely. The night. There's alone. No interruptions, no responsibilities, no reasons to hold back from whatever this moment was becoming. He moved, not with the deliberation he had maintained since entering, not with the careful control that governed his public self. He moved with the speed of a man who had been holding himself in check and had finally been given permission to release. His arms closed around her waist, lifting her against him, and her surprised gasp dissolved into laughter that vibrated through her chest into his. "Dayo." He was already moving, carrying her toward the bed with the determination of a man who had waited too long and was done with waiting. She weighed nothing in his arms, or perhaps he was too flooded with intention to notice weight, to notice anything beyond the heat of her skin through the red fabric, the scent of roses and perfume, and her that filled every breath. He laid her on the bed with a gentleness that contradicted the urgency of his movements, following her down so that his body covered hers, his forearms bracketing her face, his eyes searching hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Luna, don't talk." Her fingers pressed against his lips, her eyes dark and urgent. "Don't make this into something else. Don't make it about gratitude or appreciation or whatever you're about to say. Just," she arched against him, her body speaking where her words failed. "Just be here, with me, tonight, completely." He was. The night unfolded with the intensity of years compressed into hours, the particular fire that came from separation and reunion, from longing denied and finally permitted. They moved together with the familiarity of bodies that had learned each other across years of intimacy, and the strangeness of bodies that had been apart too long, that rediscovered rhythms both remembered and newly invented. Luna's sounds filled the room, gasps and cries and laughter and whispers that dissolved into moans, the particular music of her pleasure that he had missed with an ache he had not allowed himself to acknowledge. Time lost meaning. The red light pulsed and faded and pulsed again. The city beyond the window continued its indifferent rotation, and they were alone in the universe they created, two people who had survived separation and compromise and the slow erosion of ordinary life, finding each other again with the desperation of those who understood how easily it could all be lost. When they finally lay still, gasping, the sweat cooling on their skin in the conditioned air, Dayo felt something settle inside him that had been restless for months, perhaps longer. Perhaps since the first leaving, since the pregnancy, since the slow reconstruction of a marriage that had been tested in ways neither had anticipated. Luna turned her head on the pillow, her hair spread across the white linen like dark water, her eyes finding his in the dimming light. She looked exhausted and radiant and completely present, the particular combination that had always made his heart ache with the intensity of what he felt for her. "I want this to last forever." Her voice was barely above a whisper, rough from use, stripped of any performance or pretense. Just the raw truth of her desire, spoken into the quiet between them. Dayo smiled, the expression reaching his eyes, reaching every part of him that had ever doubted, ever feared, ever wondered if happiness was something he deserved or merely something he borrowed. "It will last forever." He reached for her hand, intertwining their fingers with the familiarity of a gesture repeated 10,000 times and still meaningful. "Don't worry." She studied his face, searching for the certainty she needed, finding it in the steadiness of his gaze, the warmth of his touch, the weight of his presence beside her. "How do you know?" "Because I will make it so. Simple. Absolute." The statement of a man who had spent his life making impossible things real through sheer force of will. "Whatever it takes, Luna. Whatever the industry demands, whatever challenges come, whatever distance or pressure or time tries to put between us. I will make this last. I will make us last." That is not hope. That is not promise. That is fact. She smiled, the expression tired and satisfied and completely trusting, and pressed closer against him, her head finding the space on his shoulder that had always been hers. "You are impossible. You keep saying that. Because it's true. And yet here we are. Here we are." They lay in silence, the red light finally fading to darkness, the city beyond continuing its endless movement, the roses slowly releasing their fragrance into the cooling air. Dayo felt her breathing slow, felt her body relax into sleep against him, and allowed himself to follow, descending into rest with the particular peace that came from knowing that everything that mattered was present, was safe, was his. The last thought before sleep claimed him was not of Michael, not of Silas, not of the war that continued in shadows beyond these walls. It was of Luna's voice, singing in the darkness above him, offering herself completely, trusting him to receive what she gave. He would spend forever earning that trust. He would spend forever worthy of it. And as sleep finally took him, her hand still clasped in his, her heartbeat steady against his side, he believed, truly believed, that forever was possible. Chapter 565, Luna and Dayo at home. Dayo woke before dawn, his body responding to the internal clock that had governed his mornings for as long as he can remember, the rhythm that had carried him through recording sessions and world tours, and the quiet desperation of days when music felt like the only language he spoke fluently. Beside him, Luna slept with the deep unconsciousness of someone finally released from tension she had carried for months, perhaps years, her breathing slow and even, her face softened into something younger than waking aloud. The red light had faded to darkness during their night together, and now the first gray hints of morning filtered through the curtains, painting her skin in shades of pearl and shadow. He considered, briefly, his morning jog, the route through the neighborhood that cleared his head, the disciplined rhythm of feet against pavement that had been his meditation since adolescence. Then he looked at Luna, at the way her hair spread across the pillow like dark water, at the curve of her shoulder emerging from the sheet, at the particular peace that had settled into her features after hours of passion that had left them both exhausted and renewed. He skipped the jog. Instead, he rose with deliberate quiet, his movements careful not to disturb her, and pulled on the workout clothes he kept in the drawer beside the bed. The house had a gym, a well-equipped, added during renovations he had barely supervised, another room that existed more as intention than use. He spent 30 minutes there, enough to maintain the discipline that had defined his physical life, not enough to exhaust himself or generate noise that might wake her. Push-ups, pull-ups, a brief cycle on the stationary bike, his mind wandering through melodies and lyrics, and the particular problem of how to introduce Luna's return to the world without overwhelming the narrative of beautiful things. When he finished, he showered in the guest bathroom, the hot water washing away sweat and the residue of last night, and emerged with his skin humming and his mind clear in a way that jogging never quite achieved. He dressed in comfortable clothes, soft cotton pants, a faded shirt from a concert years ago, nothing that suggested the executive he would become later, and descended to the kitchen with purpose forming in his mind. The kitchen was the heart of the house, designed during their brief period of genuine domestic optimism before Jennifer's birth, before the second leaving, before the slow reconstruction. It was oversized, equipped like a mid-level restaurant, stainless steel and marble and appliances that had cost more than some cars. Dayo had insisted on it during construction, though he rarely cooked only on special occasions, the space representing something he had wanted to become rather than something he was. A chef, a man who prepared meals for his family with the same care he applied to music. A fantasy of ordinary competence that had seemed achievable during planning and elusive during execution. This morning, he intended to justify its existence. Luna was sweet-toothed. Had always been, from their earliest days together, when she would sneak pastries between recording sessions and lick frosting from her fingers with the unself-conscious pleasure of someone who had not yet learned to perform moderation. He remembered her favorites from years of observation, the particular desserts that made her eyes close in satisfaction, the flavors that prompted sounds of pleasure not unlike those she made in other contexts. He would make them all. Not perfectly. He was a musician who cooked, not a chef who performed, but generously, abundantly, with the care that compensated for technical deficiency through sheer intention. He began with pancakes, the batter mixed by hand in a ceramic bowl Luna had chosen during a trip to Morocco, the rhythm of whisking became meditative as the kitchen filled with the warm scent of vanilla and butter. While they cooked, he prepared a fruit compote, berries and stone fruits simmering with sugar and citrus until they collapsed into something syrupy and intense. He made French toast with brioche he found in the freezer, the bread thick-cut and soaked in custard, pan-fried until the edges caramelized into lacework. He prepared a chocolate sauce, dark and glossy, that could be drizzled over everything or eaten directly with a spoon, depending on preference. The kitchen became his studio, each dish a composition, each flavor a note in a larger arrangement he was building for an audience of one. He worked without recipes, guided by memory and intuition, the same instincts that served him in music translating imperfectly but sincerely into culinary effort. The space filled with steam and scent and the particular satisfaction of creation, of transforming raw materials into something that would provoke pleasure. By the time he finished, the kitchen looked like a battlefield of domestic ambition. Batter splattered across the marble counter. Chocolate smeared on the edge of a wooden spoon. Berries stained the cutting board in patterns that looked almost deliberate. And the table. He had set the table, he realized, with the care of someone preparing for ceremony rather than breakfast, plates and napkins and glasses arranged with geometric precision, the various dishes displayed like offerings at an altar. Luna was still sleeping. Dayo cleaned as he waited, the compulsive tidiness that had always governed his creative spaces translating into the kitchen with automatic efficiency. He wiped counters, washed utensils, restored order to the chaos of his preparation until the space gleamed with the particular satisfaction of work completed and work yet to be received. He was drying his hands when he heard movement above. Luna woke gradually, consciousness returning in layers that she peeled back with reluctance. Her body felt different, used, certainly, the pleasant ache of muscles exercised beyond their recent habits, but also light, as if something heavy had been lifted from her chest during sleep. She reached out automatically, seeking the warmth that had been beside her through the night, the solid presence that had anchored her as she drifted toward morning. Her hand found empty sheets. The temperature had cooled, the space where he had lain now holding only the memory of his body. Luna's eyes opened fully, her mind snapping from drowsy contentment to sharp awareness in a single breath. She sat up too quickly, her head swimming with the sudden movement, her heart hammering against ribs that felt suddenly fragile. He was gone. The thought arrived with the force of certainty, bypassing reason, bypassing the ordinary explanations that a less anxious mind might generate. He had left. He had woken and dressed and departed without word, without note, without the consideration of someone who understood what his absence might mean to her. She sat in the center of the bed, the sheet clutched against her chest, her body suddenly cold despite the morning warmth, her mind racing through scenarios that all ended in abandonment. She knew it was irrational. She knew that Dayo was not the man who disappeared without explanation, that their reconciliation had been tested and proven, that last night had been not merely passion but commitment, renewed and deepened. But knowing and feeling occupied different territories, and her feelings had been shaped by years of loss, of watching people she loved choose departure over presence, of learning that attachment was the first step toward grief. Anger arrived, hot and defensive, masking the fear beneath it. How dare he? After everything. After last night. After she had laid herself bare, offered everything, trusted him with her most vulnerable self. How dare he leave without a word, without a gesture, without the simple courtesy of acknowledgement? She stayed in bed, frozen by the conflict between her rational understanding and her emotional response, her body weak with the exhaustion of their night together and the sudden drain of adrenaline. Time passed without measurement. Minutes or hours she could not distinguish, her mind cycling through memories that confirmed her fear and memories that contradicted it, neither gaining permanent purchase. Then her stomach growled. The sound was loud in the quiet room, embarrassingly physical, a demand that could not be ignored regardless of her emotional state. Luna laughed despite herself, a broken sound that was half sob, half genuine amusement at her body's refusal to participate in her drama. She was hungry, starving, actually, the energy expenditure of last night and the emotional tumult of this morning combining into a hunger that felt almost violent. She rose from the bed, her legs unsteady, her body protesting with aches that reminded her of every moment of their night together. She found one of Dayo's shirts draped over a chair and pulled it on, the fabric falling to mid-thigh, carrying his scent in a way that made her chest tighten with conflicting emotions. She descended the stairs with careful steps, one hand against the wall for balance, her mind still turbulent, her stomach growling again with increasing insistence. The smell reached her before she reached the bottom of the staircase. Sweet, rich, complex. The particular aroma of butter and sugar and chocolate and fruit, of things baking and caramelizing and transforming into pleasure. Luna stopped, her foot suspended above the final step, her nostrils flaring as she tried to process what her senses were delivering. It was impossible. It was overwhelming. It was. She moved too quickly, her weakened body responding to hunger and confusion and desperate hope with a speed that outpaced her balance. Her foot caught on the edge of the final step, her momentum carrying her forward, and she felt herself falling, the world tilting, her hands reaching for purchase that wasn't there. A hand caught her, firm, warm, and familiar. The other arm wrapped around her waist, pulling her back against a chest she knew by heartbeat, by scent, by the particular shape of his presence. Against her spine, his breath touched her ear, his voice rumbling through his chest into her back, soft and amused, and completely present. Where is this princess going to? Luna froze, her body rigid with shock, her mind struggling to process what her senses were confirming. He was here. He had been here. Not gone, not departed, not abandoned. Here, in the house, in the kitchen, in the space between one moment and the next where she had almost fallen and he had caught her. She remained still, her breathing shallow, her emotions cycling too rapidly for her to track. Relief, embarrassment, the lingering residue of anger that had nowhere to go now that its target had proven imaginary. And beneath it all, something warmer, something that responded to his voice, his touch, his presence with the automatic certainty of long habit. Dayo felt her tension, the particular rigidity that spoke of internal conflict he could not see but had learned to recognize. He held her more securely, his chin resting against her shoulder, his voice dropping to a whisper that vibrated against her skin. Wait. The word was soft, questioning, carrying no accusation. Don't tell me you are angry because you thought I left. Are you? Luna felt her face flush, the heat spreading from her cheeks down her neck, the particular guilt of someone caught in an assumption they had not voiced and now could not deny. She had been angry. She had been certain. She had constructed an entire narrative of abandonment from the simple fact of his absence from their bed, and now that narrative lay shattered around her, its fragments reflecting her own insecurity rather than his failure. She said nothing, could not. The words would either be confession or defense, and she lacked the energy for either. Dayo saw her expression, the flush, the averted eyes, the particular set of her jaw that spoke of embarrassment held barely in check. He understood immediately, completely, with the intuition that had always characterized his reading of her. He smiled, the expression warm and fond and completely without judgment, and scooped her into his arms with the same ease he had displayed the night before, the same strength that made her feel weightless and precious and entirely his. "Don't think much about it," he murmured against her hair, carrying her toward the dining room with the confidence of a man who had planned this morning precisely, who had anticipated her waking and her hunger and perhaps even her irrational fear, though he would never say so directly. "Don't think at all, if you can manage it. Just let me show you what I've been doing while you slept." Luna wanted to protest, to explain, to offer some justification for her moment of panic that would preserve her dignity. But his arms were warm around her, his heartbeat steady against her side, and the scent of whatever he had prepared was growing stronger with each step, overwhelming her capacity for speech with the more immediate demand of appetite. He carried her into the dining room and set her down with gentle precision in the chair he had positioned at the head of the table, the gesture ceremonial, almost theatrical in its care. Luna looked at the spread before her and felt her breath catch, her eyes widening with an emotion she could not fully name. Pancakes, stacked in a tower that defied gravity, golden and fragrant. French toast, thick-cut and caramelized, arranged in a fan that revealed their custardy interior. Berries in a crystal bowl, glistening with syrup. Chocolate sauce in a small pitcher, dark and inviting. Fresh juice, orange and bright, catching the morning light that streamed through the windows. And more, dishes she had not yet identified, pastries and compotes and things that blurred together in the abundance of his effort. She looked at Dayo, her mouth opening, closing, opening again without producing coherent sound. How? When? She gestured helplessly at the spread, at him, at the impossibility of what he had accomplished while she slept. Like, did you even? He woke up earlier than you. He supplied the answer with a smile, settling into the chair beside her, his posture relaxed, his eyes watching her face with the satisfaction of someone who had prepared a gift and was now receiving its reception. Luna felt her expression shift, the lingering embarrassment transforming into something else, something that sought deflection through playful accusation. Humph. She crossed her arms, the gesture undermined by her inability to stop looking at the food, by the smile tugging at her lips despite her best intentions. "And whose fault is it that I woke up late?" Dayo's smile widened, his eyes traveling down her form with deliberate appreciation, taking in the shirt she wore, his shirt, hanging loose on her frame, revealing the length of her legs, the curve of her collarbone, everything that last night had explored and this morning still desired. He gestured toward her with a sweep of his hand that encompassed all of her, his voice dropping to a register that made her stomach tighten with recognition. "Well, you caused it. With all this." The blush that had faded returned with renewed intensity, spreading across her cheeks and down her chest, her body responding to his gaze with the automatic warmth of long familiarity. She opened her mouth to retort, to deflect, to restore some balance to an exchange that had shifted too quickly toward intimacy. And he was already moving, standing from his chair, his hands finding her waist and lifting her with an ease that made her gasp, carrying her back toward the kitchen with purpose in his stride. "Dayo, breakfast can wait. But the food will still be there. But I'm hungry. So am I." She laughed despite herself, the sound breathless and genuine, her arms wrapping around his neck as he navigated the doorway, her protests dissolving into the particular pleasure of being wanted with an urgency that matched her own. The kitchen counter was cold against her back, his hands warm beneath the shirt, and for a time that measured itself in gasps and whispers and the slow building of pressure, breakfast was entirely forgotten. When they finally returned to the dining room, the food had cooled to room temperature, the pancakes slightly deflated, the chocolate sauce thickened from standing. Luna did not care. She sat in her chair, her own chair this time, not the one he had positioned for ceremony, and looked at the spread with eyes that saw beyond the physical presentation to the intention behind it. She reached for her phone, left on the counter during their kitchen interlude, and began photographing everything. The pancakes from above, the French toast from the side, the berries catching light through the crystal, the chocolate sauce in its pitcher like something from a professional shoot. She moved around the table, finding angles, adjusting composition, her focus absolute in the way that characterized her approach to everything she cared about. Dayo watched her, his confusion gradually transforming into understanding. This was not merely documentation. This was sharing. This was the particular language of a generation that expressed love through public declaration, that transformed private moments into communal celebration. He said nothing, merely smiled, his chin resting on his hand as he observed her work with the same attention he gave to mixing tracks or reviewing arrangements. She posted to Instagram with the speed of long practice, caption flowing from her fingers without apparent thought. My man. My morning. My everything. The hashtags followed, the location tag, the careful curation of image and text that would reach thousands within minutes, that would transform their private breakfast into public narrative. When she finished, she set the phone down and looked at him, her expression slightly guilty, slightly defiant, entirely herself. What? Dayo shook his head, his smile widening. Nothing. Just observing the modern ritual. Don't mock me. Never. He reached across the table, his hand covering hers. I just find it charming that you needed to share this, that our morning became something you wanted the world to witness. It's not about the world. Her voice softened, her fingers intertwining with his. It's about memory, about making this real by saying it aloud. About, she paused, searching for words, about not letting this become invisible. Because so much of our life has been invisible, Dayo. So much of us existed only in private, only in spaces no one else could see. And I don't want that anymore. I want people to know. I want to be visible. I want this to be visible. He understood. Better than she expected, perhaps better than she intended. He had spent his own career navigating the tension between public performance and private truth, had learned the particular loneliness of being known by millions and truly seen by almost none. Her desire to share, to declare, to make their morning into something that existed beyond their walls. This was not vanity. This was claiming. This was the same impulse that drove her return to music, the same refusal to remain hidden, the same courage to be witnessed. Can we eat now? His voice was gentle, teasing, bringing them back to the ordinary pleasure of the moment. Luna smiled, the expression transforming her face into something luminous, and nodded with the enthusiasm of someone who had been delaying gratification for too long. Dayo stood, moving to her chair, pulling it out with ceremonial precision before guiding her to it with a hand at her elbow. He served her himself, describing each dish with the particular pride of someone who had created something with imperfect skill but perfect intention. This is the pancake batter I made from memory. Your mother's recipe, I think, or something close to it. The compote is improvised. Berries, stone fruit, too much sugar probably, but I was thinking of you. The French toast used brioche from the freezer, soaked in custard with vanilla and orange zest. The chocolate sauce. He paused, his expression shifting to something almost shy. The chocolate sauce I made 3 times before I got it right. Kept breaking the emulsion. Almost gave up. Luna listened, her eyes widening with each description, her fork hovering above the plate as he spoke. She had never seen this side of him, not fully, not deliberately, not in the context of domestic intimacy rather than grand gesture. The man who composed albums in weeks, who performed for stadiums, who negotiated with the most powerful figures in the industry. This same man had spent his morning failing at chocolate sauce, had persisted through 3 attempts, had refused to give up because he wanted to give her something perfect. She ate. The pancakes were slightly dense, the French toast perhaps too sweet, the chocolate sauce richer than technically balanced. She did not care. Each bite carried his attention, his effort, his presence in a form she could taste and swallow and make part of herself. She made sounds of pleasure that were entirely unperformed, her eyes closing, her shoulders relaxing, her body settling into the particular peace of being completely cared for. Dayo watched her eat with the satisfaction of someone witnessing the success of an experiment that mattered more than any professional achievement. He ate himself, though his attention remained primarily on her, on the expressions that crossed her face, on the small gestures of pleasure that she made without awareness. When they finished, when the plates held only remnants and her stomach felt pleasantly full, Luna stood without prompting and began gathering dishes. Dayo moved to help, but she waved him off, her expression determined. You cooked. I clean. That's the agreement. Is it? He smiled, following her into the kitchen. Despite her protest, I don't recall signing this agreement. It's implicit, universal, written in the laws of domestic physics. Those laws. She ran water in the sink, adding soap until bubbles formed, and began washing plates with the efficiency of someone who had performed this task thousands of times. Dayo stood beside her, drying with a towel, and they fell into the rhythm that had defined their best moments. Working together without need for speech, the silence comfortable rather than empty. Then he splashed her, water across her cheek, sudden and cold, droplets catching in her hair. Luna gasped, turning to him with outrage that dissolved immediately into laughter at his expression, guilty, delighted, younger than he usually allowed himself to appear. Dayo, accident. That was not an accident. Technical malfunction. She retaliated, her hand cupping water from the sink and flinging it at his chest, the dark fabric of his shirt absorbing the impact. He laughed, the sound rich and genuine, and splashed her again. And suddenly they were children, were new lovers, were people without history or weight or the accumulated seriousness of lives lived too long under scrutiny. The kitchen became their playground. Water everywhere, on the floor, on the counters, on their clothes and skin. They chased each other around the island, slipped on wet tiles, caught each other before falls that would have been painful rather than comic. Luna's shirt, his shirt, became transparent where water clung to it, and Dayo's eyes darkened with appreciation that had nothing to do with humor, and they found themselves against the refrigerator, his hands in her wet hair, her laughter dissolving into something softer, something that led them back upstairs with less urgency than before, but equal certainty. They watched a film in the afternoon, something neither of them would remember later, curled together on the couch with blankets and the particular languor of people who had no obligations, no deadlines, no reasons to be anywhere else. Luna dozed against his shoulder, woke to rewind scenes she had missed, dozed again. Dayo stroked her hair, his mind wandering through melodies that might become songs, through arrangements that might become albums, through the particular problem of how to introduce Luna's return without overshadowing her with his own narrative. They talked, when they talked, about nothing important. About Jennifer, who would return tomorrow with Abishala, who had apparently sent 3 text messages asking if they were alive, each progressively more amused. About the meeting yesterday, the plans forming, the careful choreography of revelation. About Amanda, who had called twice and been sent to voicemail, Luna's smile suggesting she would enjoy returning that particular call with news of her morning. Dayo did not go to work. He had told them, Alice, Wayne, Valerie, the machinery of JD records that usually governed his days, that he would not be coming. A single message, sent before Luna woke, before the kitchen became theater, before the day unfolded into something neither had planned but both needed. Not coming in. Handle what you can. I'll be unreachable. They had not questioned it. Perhaps Alice had smiled, understanding something the others did not. Perhaps Wayne had made a joke that no one recorded. Perhaps the machinery had simply continued, as it always did, capable of functioning without his direct presence for a single day. Luna asked him about it, late in the afternoon, her head in his lap as they lay on the couch, the film forgotten, the light shifting toward evening. Why didn't you go? You never skip work. You never let things wait. Dayo looked down at her, his fingers tracing patterns against her scalp that made her eyes half close in pleasure. Because some things shouldn't wait. Because I spent too long treating our marriage as something that happened in the spaces between obligations, rather than as the obligation itself. Because, he paused, searching for words that would carry the weight of what he felt. Because yesterday you gave me something. Not just your body, though that was, he smiled, the expression carrying heat and tenderness in equal measure. Extraordinary. You gave me your trust, your vulnerability, your complete presence. And I wanted to show you, not just say, that I understood what that meant, that I was worthy of it, that I would be present, too, completely, for as long as you needed. Luna was quiet for a long moment, her breathing slow and even against his thigh. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper, carrying the weight of emotion she had not expected to feel. I want this to be real, Dayo. Not just today, not just the morning after. I want this to be what we are, what we build, not the exception that proves the rule of our busyness, but the foundation that everything else rests on. He bent to kiss her forehead, his lips warm against her skin, his voice rumbling through his chest into her awareness. Then that's what we'll build. Starting now. Starting today. Starting with breakfast and water fights and films we won't remember and all the ordinary moments that make a life worth living. She smiled, her eyes closing, her body relaxing into the particular peace of being completely understood. And tomorrow? Tomorrow we return to the world. To Jennifer and Amanda and meetings and music and all the complications we've set in motion. He paused, his fingers stilling against her hair. But today is ours. Today is the memory we'll carry into whatever comes next. Today is the proof that we can do this, that we can be present, that we can choose each other above everything else. Luna said nothing, merely pressed closer against him, her hand finding his where it rested on her shoulder, their fingers intertwining with the automatic intimacy of long practice. The evening light faded through the windows, painting the room in shades of amber and rose, and they lay together in the quiet. Two people who had survived separation and compromise and the slow erosion of ordinary life, finding each other again not through grand gesture, but through the accumulated weight of small attentions, of pancakes and chocolate sauce and water splashed in kitchens, of presents offered and received and offered again. Tomorrow would bring complications. Michael's schemes, Silas's threats, the machinery of industry that consumed everything it touched. But tomorrow was not yet here. And for this day, this single day that existed outside the narrative of their public lives, they had chosen each other with the completeness that made everything else possible. Dayo felt Luna's breathing slow, felt her body settle into the rhythm of sleep against him, and allowed himself to follow, descending into rest with the particular peace that came from knowing that everything that mattered was present, was safe, was his. The last thought before sleep claimed him was not of music or strategy or the wars that waited in shadows beyond these walls. It was of her hand in his, her weight against his chest, her trust offered and received and offered again, the endless reciprocity that made love not merely emotion but practice, not merely feeling but discipline, not merely gift but commitment renewed with every morning, every meal, every ordinary moment transformed by attention into something sacred. He would spend forever earning this trust. He would spend forever worthy of it. And as sleep finally took him, her breathing steady against his side, he believed, truly believed, that forever was possible, that it began not in grand declarations but in pancakes, not in public performance but in private presence, not in the extraordinary moments that defined narrative but in the ordinary days that defined life. Today had been ordinary. Today had been everything. And tomorrow, when it came, would begin from here.